Chapter 122. Within the cemetery of death that was littered with white bones, the wondrous building in front of them held a strong attraction for Duke. In that moment, Duke only cared about looking around in surprise and didn't continue to make a move against Han Shuhua. However, when Emily entered the cemetery of death, the first thing she did wasn't to observe the surroundings, but to fly in front of Han Shuhua and ask anxiously, "Are you all right?" If it was an ordinary person who fell from such a high altitude, perhaps they would have suffered some injuries. However, Han Shuhua was completely unharmed. Shaking his head at Emily, Han Shuhua stood up with a darkened face, his gaze firmly fixed on Wind Archmage Duke in the distance. Duke was excitedly observing his surroundings. When Senior Swordsman Eric arrived next to him, he said joyfully, "This is the cemetery of death. There's no mistaking it. I didn't think that we'd actually be able to enter. Mr. Duke, we've been researching for a long time and haven't discovered anything, but when the green light was emitted from that person's body, it seems that the boundary of the cemetery of death opened. It's very strange." Eric looked at Han Shuhua from afar and said lowly to Duke. Nodding, Duke said, "Indeed. It looks like this person is a bit odd, and the green light just now gave me a familiar feeling. It seems to have come from the Eye of Darkness." When these words were spoken, Eric was greatly shocked and exclaimed, "How is this possible?" Grasping the demon's lair edge in his hand, Han Shuhua chanted an incantation and the seven-winged little skull appeared, bone dagger in hand. 3 zombie warriors appeared one after another, each holding a wooden club and standing side by side with the little skull, blocking in front of Han Shuhua and Emily. "You were the one who opened the boundary of the cemetery of death?" Emily let out a sigh of relief when she saw that Han Shuhua was fine. She then thought back to the previous situation and asked Han Shuhua with great confusion. Nodding, Han Shua's face darkened as he said, "That's right. The cemetery of death was opened by something on me. This time, Duke and Eric must die. Help me deal with Duke. I'll explain it to you after we kill them." Emily didn't ask anything after hearing Han Shua's words. She obediently gripped her magic staff and stared at the approaching Wind Archmage Duke with a baleful expression. "He's actually a necromancer. Looks like he won't be easy to deal with." Eric had fought with Han Shuhua before and felt that Han Shua's strength wasn't inferior to his own. Now that he saw Han Shuhua even summon a zombie warrior, he said with a frown, "Let's kill them first. We're excavating the secrets of the cemetery of death." Duke snorted lightly, his body floating in the air as he rushed over. Eric didn't say anything else, he was just stunned for a moment. Then he followed behind Duke and rushed over. A melodious chant surged out of Emily's mouth. The magic staff in her hand suddenly shot out several snake-like strands of black air, entangling the flying Duke. When Duke saw the black aura approaching, his face became extremely solemn. A tornado suddenly formed in front of him, and the white bones on the ground flew up. The tornado swept towards the black aura, and all the black aura was sucked into it. Snorting coldly, Emily said to Han Shuhua, "Be careful." She also leapt into the air and waved the magic staff in her hand, starting a fierce battle with Duke in midair. "Let's not sit around either." Han Shuhua grinned and laughed. Little Skull had already surrounded Eric with the 3 zombie warriors. At the same time, Han Shuhua used the original demons to look behind Eric and Duke, observing their every move. "Do you think 3 zombies and a skeleton can stop me?" Eric exclaimed in disdain, the long sword in his hand blossoming with dark green fighting aura. His body was like a bulldozer, kicking up a cloud of dust as he charged towards Han Shuhua. Laughing coldly in his heart, Han Shuhua used his mental strength to control the zombie warriors and Little Skull to block his path. The Little Skull, who should have been as fast as lightning, was deliberately controlled by Han Shuhua, becoming as slow as the zombie warriors. Eric, who was flying over, formed a ball of light with his dark green fighting aura, enveloping one of the zombie warriors within. The sound of bones shattering came from the body of the first zombie warrior. Under the effect of the dark green fighting aura, the first zombie warrior's body broke into several pieces like a stiff piece of wood. Tilting his body in disdain, Eric nimbly dodged the blows of the 2 zombie warriors' wooden sticks. With a thrust of his long sword, The other zombie warrior's neck was cut open, its body on the verge of collapse. Little Skull approached with the bone knife in hand, leaning against the other zombie warrior. He raised the bone knife in his hand stiffly and swung it at Eric. Eric could easily handle even the zombie warriors. Now that the Little Skull raised the bone knife to stab at him, Eric didn't take it to heart at all. He casually raised his sword to block the attack with some impatience. It was at this moment that the bone knife, which had been abnormally slow, suddenly sped up dozens of times. The originally stiff and slow Little Skull's body was now so nimble that it left him flabbergasted. Eric had just raised the long sword in his hand, but before he could make a move, the bone knife had already landed on his chest. Eric retreated, scared out of his wits. However, he was still a beat too slow. With a puff, a large piece of flesh flew out of his chest. Eric cried out in pain and exclaimed in disbelief, "How is this possible? What kind of skeletal warrior is this?" Unfortunately, the Little Skull didn't have any reaction to Eric's exclamation. After the successful stab, it pressed forward relentlessly. Before Eric could steady himself, the Little Skull was already in front of him. When Eric condensed his fighting aura back into his long sword, the 7 bone spikes on the Little Skull's back flew out at the same time. After making a semicircle, they all accurately stabbed into Eric's body. The 7 bone spikes pierced through Eric's neck, forehead, and heart. He didn't have time to release the fighting aura he had condensed, and his body fell straight down. Even in death, the fear on his face didn't disappear. Duke and Emily, who were fighting, noticed the commotion at the same time. When they saw Eric die tragically with 7 bone spikes, they were both shocked. However, accompanying the shock was Duke's worry and Emily's joy. Emily had already witnessed the Little Skull's miraculous abilities last time. Even the dark archmage Emily was powerless against the Little Skull's pursuit. The Little Skull's agility and speed had long since left a deep impression on Emily. Now that she saw that the 7 bone spikes on the Little Skull's back could even injure people, she had a deeper understanding of the mysteries of Han Shuo. Duke was having a bit of a hard time dealing with Emily's attacks. He'd originally hoped that Eric would help him after taking care of Han Shuo. He hadn't thought that the battle-hardened Eric would die so quickly, and that Han Shuo, who was standing there, hadn't moved at all. This made Duke feel a bit flustered. "What, you want to run? Can you get away today?" The original demons noticed that Duke's eyes were flickering after taking care of Eric. Han Shuo moved closer to Duke and looked at him with a supercilious smile, opening his mouth to mock. Duke's face suddenly grew cold as his normally amiable features became slightly sinister. He stared at Han Shuo and said, "You're courting death." Many sharp bone fragments on the ground suddenly shot through the air towards Han Shuo with a wave of Duke's magic staff. The sound of breaking through the air was ear-piercing and the power was quite astonishing. When Emily saw that Han Shuo was under attack, she was even more nervous than Han Shuo as she chanted a dark magic spell. A pitch-black hole appeared out of thin air before the sharp bone fragments' attacks had even reached Han Shuo. All the bone fragments were attracted by the dark hole and were all sucked in. Duke, who just released his attack, not only didn't continue to attack, but instead leapt out and fled. It looked like he'd seen that Emily was worried about Han Shuo, so he'd made a move to attack Han Shuo so that Emily could salvage the situation and then seize the opportunity to escape. It was a pity that it was easy to enter the cemetery of death, but difficult to leave. The Eye of Darkness once again landed in Han Shuo's space ring. Without the help of the Eye of Darkness, even a wind archmage like him would be unable to undo the boundary. With a bang, a green light shone from the barrier. Beaming with joy and giggling for a while, Emily looked at Han Shuo affectionately and said under Han Shuo's astonished gaze, "Bad boy, you finally know how to think for me. How nice." Han Shuo was speechless. He thought back to what had happened earlier and realized that he hadn't thought for Emily at all. He'd been thinking for himself from start to finish. Han Shuo felt a bit embarrassed when she said this and smiled awkwardly. "You don't need to worry too much about this matter. I actually knew where this batch of resources was being sent to. I just wanted to catch him red-handed and make him have nothing to say. Although this batch of resources has been intercepted, many of the McGrady Guild's people have escaped. They'll certainly think of a way to redeem the siege items from the forest troll's hands. If someone buys the siege resources from the forest troll, you just need to let them deal with them the way they were, and you'll be doing me a great favor. When they get their hands on those items, they'll still deliver them to my target. I'll capture him then, and it won't affect the overall situation. Emily looked at Han Shuo and said with a smile. Nodding, Han Shuo said, No problem. I'll return to the dark forest again when I get some rations back to the Empire. I'll talk to the forest troll then, and it won't affect your plans. Right? You can't open Duke's space ring anyway. Why don't you give it to me? I'll think of a way to find someone to open the boundary and see what's inside. Okay, you can take it. Han Shuo readily handed Duke's space ring to Emily. His thoughts raced as he suddenly remembered Yuna's beautiful space ring. Yuna was only an adept mage, and logically speaking, Emily, who was a level higher, should be able to open the boundary she'd set up. Therefore, Han Shuo took out Yuna's space ring and handed it to Emily. This space ring has a boundary set up as well, but the person was an adept mage. I think you should be able to open the boundary inside and see what's inside. She didn't ask Han Shuo how he'd obtained this space ring. Emily held the space ring in her hand, took a deep breath, and focused her mental strength. The emerald green space ring suddenly lit up, accompanied by a strong magical ripple. The space ring lit up to a certain degree and then suddenly dimmed. Exhaling lightly, a few items suddenly appeared in Emily's hand. Some female undergarments, a crystal card, a book on water magic, and some medicine for bandaging wounds. Staring oddly at Han Shuo, Emily said, I hadn't thought that you'd be such a heartless person. How did this woman die in your hands? After flipping through Emily's hand and discovering that there wasn't anything of value, Han Shuo only put away the emerald green space ring and said with a smile, A lewd woman betrayed me, so I killed her out of anger. It's a very normal thing. Pa, I don't believe you, Emily said. All right, there's only 2 days left before I have to report to the organization. I need to leave the cemetery of death as soon as possible. You should already know about my identity and background. We'll leave this place for now, and you can attend to your matters first. Whether it's through the Dark Mantle or the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, I think it won't be hard for you to find me. Let's leave this place first. Han Shuo thought of a pile of things to do and said to Emily, All right, although you're a dishonest little brat, it won't be hard for me to find you. I'll ask you one last question. Between Brian and this weird name Han Shuo, which one should I call you? Emily said, Han Shuo. This is a new name given to me by the person who taught me martial techniques. I want you to call me by this name in the future. Han Shuo thought for a moment and responded. Nodding and not asking any more questions, Han Shuo took Emily around the Cemetery of Death. The two left the Cemetery of Death through the central transportation matrix amidst Emily's surprised gasps of admiration. Chapter 123. After leaving the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo and Emily went their separate ways. As a senior member of the Dark Mantle, Emily still had a mission to complete and couldn't always stay by Han Shuo's side. It had been a long time since he'd returned to the academy, and Han Shuo missed Fanny a bit. But now that Emily's matter had occurred, Han Shuo didn't know how to face Fanny. After hesitating for a moment, Han Shuo didn't immediately return to the academy, but instead walked towards the buzzed merchant guild. Han Shuo had asked Phoebe to help him search for the materials to refine the Earth Elite Zombie. Now that so much time had passed, it was time to ask her if she'd finished. In addition, some of the treasures from the Forest Troll's Holy Land in the Space Ring also had to be dealt with through Phoebe. Add to that the rations for the Forest Troll and dwarves to get through the winter, so it was necessary to go to the buzzed merchant guild. After the incident with Grover, Phoebe had already grasped the majority of power in the buzzed merchant guild. After a few visits, everyone in the guild knew Han Shuo. This time, when Han Shuo arrived at the door, the guards didn't even announce their arrival and let Han Shuo directly in. As he walked towards the living room, Han Shuo suddenly heard Fabian's voice reprimanding a servant in one of the rooms. Your father spent gold coins to let you in. You must work hard. Otherwise, even with my position in the guild, I won't be able to protect you. Understood, uncle. Another voice that Han Shuo was familiar with replied honestly. When this voice sounded, Han Shuo's body sped up in surprise. When he arrived at the door to her room, he pushed it open without knocking due to his agitated emotions, startling Fabian, who was inside. He immediately cried out in alarm, "Who dares trespass on my territory?" "It's me, Mr. Fabian." Han Shuo chuckled and strode in. Fabian heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Han Shuo's voice and walked out of the room with a chuckle. He opened his mouth and said, "So it's you. Hehe. Are you here to look for our Miss Phoebe again?" Another stout figure also quickly rushed out from the inner room. When he saw Han Shuo, he yelled with indescribable surprise, "Brian, why is it you? Why are you also at the Bust Merchant Guild?" Hee hee, could it be that you're also a member of the Bust Merchant Guild? Then we can be colleagues again, right? Little Fatty Jack had grown a little taller, but his weight seemed to have increased a little faster. He rushed out of the room with large strides, causing the ground to make pong-pong sounds. "Long time no see, Jack. Why are you in the Bust Merchant Guild?" Han Shuo was also quite happy to see Jack this time. Little Fatty Jack was the closest friend that Han Shuo had met when he'd first arrived at the academy. Han Shuo had given him a sum of money last time, and Han Shuo had thought that he'd never see him again. Who would have thought that he'd be able to see him again after such a short period of time? "You two know each other?" Fabian was a bit surprised and looked at Jack, then at Han Shuo. Nodding, Han Shuo smiled and explained, "When I was at the academy, Jack and I worked as errand boys together. Hehe, not only do we know each other, but we also have a very good relationship." "Yes, Uncle, Brian is so awesome. I didn't think that I'd be able to run into him here," Jack said quite happily. "Mr. Fabian, I'd like to catch up with your nephew first. I'll go see Miss Phoebe in a moment. Please help me put in the word." Han Shuo smiled faintly at Fabian. Han Shuo had saved both Fabian and Phoebe's lives. Add to that the fact that he'd brought great business with him a few times, Fabian had long since viewed Han Shuo as a benefactor. Therefore, when he heard Han Shuo's words, he immediately agreed readily and even winked at Jack, as if he wanted to hint something to Jack. It was a pity that the excited Jack didn't notice his uncle's hint. Rather, it was the more mature and experienced Han Shuo who saw everything clearly and couldn't help but snicker endlessly in his heart. When Fabian left, Han Shuo immediately asked, "Jack, how did you come to the Bust Merchant Guild? You gave me some gold coins last time, and I left the academy. When I got home, I didn't know what to do, so I helped my father butcher cows and sheep. I saw that the family was poor, so I secretly took one of the gold coins you gave me and exchanged it for bits and pieces to give to my father. But he still discovered my secret afterwards, so I told him that I'd found a bag of gold coins on the road. My father thought that I couldn't always be a butcher, so he took half of the gold coins and found my uncle Fabian, asking him to help me learn bookkeeping from a teacher in the Bust Merchant Guild. That's how it is." "Oh right. Why are you at the Bust Merchant Guild? I saw that my uncle seemed to be quite respectful to you. What's going on?" Jack looked at Han Shuo with surprise and asked in confusion. Han Shuo casually said a few words to fool Jack. He and Jack talked about old times for a while. From Jack's expression and tone, Han Shuo felt that he was quite willing to work for the Bust Merchant Guild. Therefore, Han Shuo decided to help Jack a bit and was going to ask Phoebe to put in a few words for him. He believed that Phoebe would have to sell him some face. It was no wonder that he was happy to stay here. When he'd been an errand boy at the academy, not only had Jack had to work day and night, but he was often bullied by other students and errand boys. His days naturally weren't too good. Now that he was at the Bust Merchant Guild, at least no one dared to do anything to him with the care of Fabian, Phoebe's person. Compared to the hard work of an errand boy, learning things now was much easier and more interesting. It was no wonder that Jack liked it here so much. They chatted for a long time until Fabian came over to urge Han Shuo and tell Han Shuo that Miss Phoebe was waiting for him. Han Shuo finally patted Jack's shoulder and said with a smile, "Then I'll be leaving first. Since you're in the Bust Merchant Guild, we'll have many opportunities to meet in the future." "All right, you can go and do your thing. If you have time, remember to come visit me often. Although I'm doing well here, I don't have many friends." I understand." After walking away from Fabian's room, Han Shuo's sensitive ears immediately overheard Fabian and Jack's conversation. Fabian's words were nothing more than for Jack to get along well with Han Shuo, and that Han Shuo was his benefactor and the like. Phoebe was still as beautiful and moving as ever. She wore a navy blue dress that fit her tall, slender figure and outstanding temperament, making her look even more elegant and dignified. Her beautiful cheeks, which were lightly rouged, were smooth and supple, and a faint blush was hidden between her cheeks. Her bright eyes and white teeth were embedded in her face that was like a work of art. She appeared so perfect and flawless. You've disappeared for almost a month. What do you plan to talk about this time? The maids around them had long since left. Phoebe sat upright in the hall, holding a cup of fragrant tea in her hand and sipping it leisurely. She flicked a glance at Han Shua lightly and said faintly, "It's only been a month. Why does Miss Phoebe seem to have become a bit more beautiful?" Han Shua was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Phoebe had never purposely dressed herself up when he'd met her before, but it was obvious that she put on some light makeup this time. Therefore, in Han Shua's eyes, Phoebe's beauty had indeed increased a bit. Phoebe's eyes lit up when these words were spoken, and the faint blush on her cheeks began to spread. The corners of her lips curved in a cheerful smile as she said softly, "I haven't seen you for a month, but you've become more and more glib." Laughing heartily, Han Shua walked rudely in front of Phoebe and took the teapot and teacups from in front of Phoebe. He poured a cup of tea for himself and took a sip before saying, "Before we get down to business, I hope you'll do me a favor and help me remind that friend of mine." Phoebe wasn't surprised. She nodded her sparkling chin twice and said in a cool voice, "I heard from Fabian just now that you're friends with that little fatty. Heh, he's such an honest person. How would he know a friend like you?" Laughing involuntarily, Han Shua scratched his head and said, "How can you say that? Am I not honest enough?" "Humph. If you can be considered honest, then there's no one in this world who doesn't follow the rules. I remember all the bad things you've done to me. How dare you call yourself honest?" Phoebe rolled her eyes prettily and glared fiercely at Han Shua, fiercely drinking a mouthful of tea to hide his awkwardness. Han Shua said with a sheepish smile, "Let's not talk about the past. You still haven't agreed to help me take care of Jack." "No problem. I'll help you take good care of him. It's easy to help you with a small matter like this, but the other matter is a bit trickier," Phoebe said meaningfully. Starting, Han Shua looked at Phoebe in surprise and asked, "What's the trouble?" "It's about the materials you asked me to help you purchase." Phoebe thought for a moment and said, "The refining of the Earth Elite Zombie was something that Han Shua was determined to obtain." Now that he heard Phoebe say that she'd run into trouble, Han Shua immediately became a bit nervous and hurriedly asked, "What trouble? Is it that your guild can't find those materials?" Shaking her head, Phoebe's dainty eyebrows creased slightly and she sighed lowly. "With the abilities of our buzzed merchant guild, as long as something truly exists in the world, we can find a way to obtain it as long as someone can pay the price. I originally thought that the materials you needed wouldn't be worth too much gold coins, but who would have thought that after asking in detail, I discovered that those unknown items were all extremely expensive. According to my calculations, those materials add up to at least 30,000 gold coins. Although I'm the person in charge of the Buzzed Merchant Guild, I've just taken over as the chairman. I can't completely cover up such a large transaction for you, because every transaction will leave a record." When he'd heard that she'd run into trouble, Han Shua had been a bit worried, but now that he saw that it was because of the gold coins, he actually breathed a sigh of relief. The current Han Shua might be lacking in other things, but he couldn't take away all the gold coins at once. Therefore, when he heard Phoebe say that it was because of the price, he immediately smiled. "What are you smiling about? I know you have some savings, but 30,000 gold coins isn't a small sum. I can privately give you 10,000, but because it's my father's savings, I can't use it before I turn 25. I can only take out this much." "You're still smiling. I'm talking about serious matters." Phoebe furrowed her brow and tried to think of a way for Han Shua, but Han Shua grinned as if nothing had happened. This made Phoebe a bit angry. "Right? How old are you now?" Han Shua started and opened his mouth to ask Phoebe. Her face reddening, Phoebe appeared a bit bashful. After a moment of hesitation, she snuck a glance at Han Shua with a bashful expression and said, 23. "What about you?" 17. Han Shua said. Phoebe's face paled, and she appeared a bit panicked. She hastily exclaimed, "Are you joking? Do you speak and look like a 17-year-old? When she said this, Han Shuo finally remembered that when he'd possessed Brian's body, he'd already been 24 years old. Brian's originally small and skinny body had completely gained the physique of an adult due to the training of magical yuan. Add to that his original speech and experience, and he didn't look like a 17-year-old no matter how one looked at him. Dazed for a moment, Han Shuo chuckled and said, "I'm joking with you. I'm 24. When he said this, Phoebe let out an obvious sigh of relief and then smiled ruefully at Han Shuo. "Don't get any ideas about me. I'll need another 2 years before I'm 25. I don't think you can wait 2 years, so let's think of something else." A smile still hung at the corners of his lips as he blew into the space ring and rubbed it with his finger. Pieces of gold, jewels, jade, and precious stones appeared one after another in the hall. In that moment, the hall was filled with the light of jewels and jewels. All kinds of dazzling and resplendent light made the hall look extremely luxurious. "Is this enough?" Han Shuo looked at the dazed Phoebe and asked with a smile. The riches in the hall had been obtained by the forest troll after many years of plundering. When they were taken out of the space ring and piled up in front of Phoebe, it did indeed create a strong impact on her. Heart of the Blue Sea, Jade of Bow City, Mudani's necklace, King Finley's crown. Phoebe's beautiful face was filled with shock as her slender fingers flipped through the treasures that had appeared and murmured these wondrous names in a low voice. After a while, Phoebe took a few deep breaths and then looked deeply at Han Shuo. She asked, "Many of the missing treasures are in there. Did you rob an enormous dragon?" Shaking his head with a low laugh, Han Shuo said, "Don't ask about how I got my hands on them. Just tell me if these things are enough for me to trade for those materials." I can't calculate the value of these treasures at the moment, but I think that the value of these treasures is definitely over 30,000 gold coins." Phoebe's bright eyes continued to stare fixedly at Han Shuo as she slowly responded. Nodding, Han Shuo said readily, "All right then, these things are flashy but have no substance. They're not worth much to me. Put them away and give me a price to sell them. I need the materials I mentioned earlier, and I hope you can help me purchase a space ring with a larger capacity. I also need to take the rations from last time. There are so many treasures. Aren't you afraid that I'll give you a random price that'll make you lose out?" Phoebe looked at Han Shuo and stared blankly for a while. A faint smile blossomed at the corners of her lips as she asked Han Shuo, "I believe you won't." Han Shuo said with a smile and then said, "I'll come back in a few days. I hope you'll have prepared what I need by then. Let's eat before you leave." Phoebe nodded. When she saw that Han Shuo was about to leave after leaving behind the treasures, she hesitated and suddenly said softly. When these words left her mouth, Han Shuo felt a bit baffled, but Phoebe could help him a lot right now. Although Han Shuo still had many things to take care of, a meal wouldn't take too long. Therefore, he nodded readily and agreed. The location of the meal was the fake mountain that Phoebe and Han Shuo had squeezed through last time. This place had been refurbished, and the surroundings were filled with all sorts of valuable flowers and plants. The branches and leaves of some verdant, soft plants wrapped around the stone pillars of the fake mountain, giving it a rather charming appearance. After the maids placed the dishes and wine on the tables and chairs in the small pagoda, Han Shuo felt a bit uncomfortable. His gaze kept wandering to the crack in the fake mountain that Phoebe had squeezed through, and he kept thinking about what had happened here last time. Phoebe looked very natural, as if she didn't care about that spot at all. She waved her hand to dismiss all the maids and guards around her, and then enthusiastically urged Han Shuo to drink wine and eat tea. This change in attitude made Han Shuo feel a bit uncomfortable. After the wine and meat entered his stomach, although Han Shuo didn't become intoxicated due to the effects of magical yuan, now that he had tasted a woman, Han Shuo didn't know why he kept thinking about how he had violated Phoebe last time. His eyes, which had been looking at Phoebe seriously, had unwittingly gained a few other colors. Phoebe saw the change in Han Shuo's eyes. Perhaps it was because she had drunk some sweet wine, but her cheeks were even more rosy and beautiful. Phoebe's charm skyrocketed after her cold facade was removed, causing Han Shuo's thoughts to run wild as he looked at her. Chapter 124. Why are you looking at me like that? Phoebe drank another glass of translucent red wine, her eyes sparkling with a wondrous light as she flicked a glance at Han Shuo and spoke in a low voice. No, nothing. Han Shuo panicked and stammered a bit. Then why are you drooling? Phoebe pointed at the corner of Han Shuo's mouth and said with a mischievous smile. He touched his lower lip and didn't know why, but there really were some traces of water. Han Shuo said awkwardly, it's not saliva, it's wine. It really is wine. Oh, Phoebe said with amusement, so it's wine. You're already so old. How can you even miss wine? This is quite interesting. He felt that the atmosphere wasn't quite right. Han Shuo felt quite comfortable as he listened to Phoebe's gentle words. His mind was filled with thoughts, and his eyes couldn't help but look towards the crack in the fake mountain. Since we started eating, you've looked towards the crack in the fake mountain on the left 9 times. Just what is there that is worthy of your attention? Phoebe's beautiful eyes turned and landed on Han Shuo's body as she asked softly. Panicking, Han Shuo blurted out, How did you know that I kept looking there? How did you know that I've looked there 9 times? Phoebe's face grew even redder when she heard this question. She spat lightly and said in a low voice, You were looking all over the place like a thief. I was sitting right across from you, so of course I saw everything. I know that you were thinking of something bad when you were looking over there. Then what do you think I was thinking of? After experiencing what had just happened, Han Shuo suddenly felt that he was in a bit of a passive position. Demonic cultivators had always been unafraid of all conventions. They were the most carefree when they could achieve what they wanted, regardless of what others thought or said. Having suddenly understood, Han Shuo no longer looked around and stared directly at Phoebe with a smile. Phoebe was stunned and the blush on her face spread to her slender white neck. She stammered for quite a while and didn't manage to squeeze out a clear word with a red face. Her expression was even more awkward than Han Shuo's. Han Shuo laughed heartily when he saw Phoebe like this. He felt that his previous depression and passivity had been completely swept away. He said merrily, I didn't think that Miss Phoebe would care so much about me. You've even remembered how many times I looked. I'm truly overwhelmed by your favor. Brian, shut your mouth. I've discovered that you're full of bad ideas. It looks like I'll definitely lose a lot of money doing business with you in the future. Phoebe flew into a rage out of humiliation and glared fiercely at Han Shuo as she complained. After hearing Phoebe's words, Han Shuo suddenly recalled the matter of the McGrady Guild. His expression turned serious as he said to Phoebe, Speaking of doing business, I suddenly recalled something. Last time you mentioned the McGrady Guild, you said that this guild is your competitor. Is that right? Han Shuo's sudden mention of this matter surprised Phoebe a bit. She looked at Han Shuo in astonishment and Phoebe nodded, replying, That's right, the McGrady Guild is a member of the Brute Merchant Alliance. Recently, they've frequently come to our Lancelot Empire to do business. The goods they transport don't pass through the Empire's cities and towns, so they don't have to pay customs duties to the Empire. When the goods reach the Empire, the prices are kept very low, and this has had some impact on our guild. Smiling faintly, Han Shuo said, It is indeed possible to obtain generous profits without going through the proper channels, especially in some profiteering industries that the Empire prohibits. One can obtain even more frightening rewards. The McGrady Guild sure dares to do so. Why did you suddenly mention the McGrady Guild? Phoebe looked at Han Shuo in puzzlement and asked, I have a friend in the Dark Forest. He's in a special line of business and recently robbed the McGrady Guild's caravan and obtained many luxurious items. He wants me to take care of them. I wonder if I can do it through you? Bandits are bandits. What special line of business? There are all kinds of bandits in the Dark Forest. There's nothing strange about it. Heh. The McGrady Guild doesn't dare travel through the Empire's cities in order to avoid the expensive customs duties. However, this naturally increases the danger, but the McGrady Guild has private guards. Very few bandits are blind enough to touch them. Your friend was able to steal goods from the hands of the McGrady Guild. He's not simple. Of course. Oh right, do you dare accept the goods of the McGrady Guild? Our guild dares accept anything as long as it's not used in war or siege. It's said that the Empire has been investigating this area very closely recently. Therefore, if it's war equipment for siege, then forget it. Han Shuo thought of what Emily had mentioned after Phoebe's words and vaguely understood something. However, Han Shuo had long since promised Emily that he'd only planned on selling some items used by nobles to Phoebe. He didn't have any misgivings. Don't worry, I won't make things difficult for you. I've eaten enough today. I'll come find you in a few days. Help me take care of my business as soon as possible. Han Shuo comforted Phoebe and stood up, preparing to leave. Seeing that Han Shuo was about to leave, Phoebe hesitated and said to Han Shuo with some embarrassment, "Actually, I also have something I'd like to trouble you with." Looking at Phoebe in shock, Han Shuo said, "What is it?" "I have to attend a banquet in 5 days. If I go to the banquet alone, some annoying people may bother me. I want you to attend with me, as my boyfriend like last time." Phoebe looked up and down bashfully at Han Shuo and said softly. Smiling ruefully, Han Shuo shook his head and said, "Forget it. I don't want to be your shield anymore. I'll be in danger if I make others jealous and plot against me from behind. Why don't you find someone else?" "No," Phoebe shouted loudly and then explained with a frown, "I've already brought you to meet the founding elders of the Merchant Guild last time. If I suddenly change to someone else in a month's time, then everyone will surely think that I'm a fickle woman. This absolutely won't do." Han Shuo was still hesitant and seemed to be in a bit of a dilemma. Phoebe stared at Han Shuo a few times and said in a huff, "If someone doesn't agree, then I won't be serious when I do things. It'll be normal for things to be delayed for 10 days to half a month." This was what Han Shuo didn't want to see the most. Hearing Phoebe say this, Han Shuo really had no choice but to agree. He nodded helplessly and said, "All right then, just don't blame me for embarrassing you when the time comes." "That's more like it. How can you let me bring someone else to the banquet? Wouldn't you be worried if someone took advantage of me?" Phoebe saw that Han Shuo had agreed and a faint smile reappeared on her face. She asked Han Shuo, "Then aren't you afraid that I'll take advantage of you?" "Then aren't you afraid that I'll take advantage of you?" Han Shuo rolled his eyes at Phoebe and said unhappily. When these words came out, Phoebe's beautiful face blushed again. She turned her head away and didn't dare look at Han Shuo. She said in a low voice, "Don't be afraid. You've already taken advantage of everything that you should have." Han Shuo's heart fluttered, and he saw the redness on Phoebe's neck and ears from behind. For some reason, he blurted out, "Not everything. We haven't even had sex yet." When these words left his mouth, Han Shuo immediately reacted. He didn't wait for Phoebe to speak and immediately got up to quickly walk outside. He said in a fluster, "I'm full, so I'll be leaving first. I'll come back in 5 days." "You stinking scoundrel who spouts nonsense." Phoebe never would have thought that Han Shuo would say this. She immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation and cursed at Han Shuo's fleeing figure. When Han Shuo's figure had disappeared even faster, she finally laughed lowly and said, "Damn it, you dare say such things to me. Humph, you're getting bolder and bolder." It was just past noon when he left the buzzed Merchant Guild. It had been almost a month since he'd last reported to the Dark Mantle. Therefore, after looking at the time, Han Shuo hired a carriage and walked out of the Dark Mantle stronghold. Han Shuo disembarked from the carriage when he was a street away from the stronghold. He released the 3 original demons to patrol the surroundings and walked towards the manor alone. "Boss, you finally arrived. I calculated the days and knew that you'd have to report here in the near future. Therefore, I purposely swapped shifts with someone else and waited for you to come over to bring you into the organization." The thief, Chester, came out as soon as Han Shuo arrived and spoke in a low, excited voice. Why do you call me boss?" Han Shuo looked oddly at Chester and asked in confusion, "I'll be following you in the future and hope that you'll give me some pointers. Of course I have to show respect to you." Chester said to Han Shuo as if it was a matter of course, "This title doesn't sound good. We'll just call each other by their original names in the future. Heh, but don't worry, if there are any good missions, I'll ask to bring you along." Han Shuo said. Chester was quite delighted when he received Han Shuo's assurance. He enthusiastically led Han Shuo inside and chattered nonstop, asking where Han Shuo had been during this time and if he'd gone on any missions. Han Shuo casually responded to Chester's questions and slowly walked into the interior of the Dark Mantle. This time, Han Shuo wasn't surprised and easily arrived at Candide room. "Oh, you really came. I thought Emily was lying to me." Candide sat in a dark corner and seemed to be studying something with a magic bottle in his hand. He didn't even raise his head when Han Shuo entered. Han Shuo didn't expect Emily to mention him and was a bit surprised. He didn't know what Emily had said in front of Candide, so he stood there silently. After a while, Candide put away the medicine bottle in his hand and said lowly with his perpetually gloomy face, "Emily said that she met you by chance in the dark forest and greatly admires your style and abilities." This really surprised me. I hadn't thought that Emily, who has such high standards, would give you such an evaluation. It looks like you do have some unique qualities. Nonsense. Emily is my woman. Of course she'll say good things about me. Han Shuo thought proudly in his heart, but his expression was the same as usual. He said, "It's been a month since the last mission. I've come to report in according to the rules and ask if there are any other missions along the way." The Dark Mantle usually didn't interfere with personal matters, so Han Shuo didn't explain anything about how he'd met Emily. Since Emily had already said it, she must have concealed everything that needed to be concealed. As long as Han Shuo didn't speak out of turn, nothing would happen to him. Nodding, Candide said, "Emily praised you and indicated that she wants you to complete her mission with her. You'll share the credit when the time comes. What do you think? You're someone by my side, so even Emily can't use you as she pleases without your permission. But if you're willing, that's another matter entirely." With the current relationship between Han Shuo and Emily, there was naturally no reason not to agree. Not to mention that Emily's mission required Han Shuo to transport the goods through the forest troll. He'd already been implicated without even realizing it. If this became a mission and he could obtain credit, then it would be even more worthwhile. "No problem. I'm willing to help her complete the mission." Han Shuo didn't hesitate and nodded in agreement. He paused and said, "The thief Chester who brought me here is very astute. Can we let him participate as well?" "The mission is Emily's. Emily has the final say on whether or not we need another person. You can just ask her directly." Candide replied faintly. He then paused and said, "Emily is Amy's younger sister. Her status in the Dark Mantle isn't low, so it'll be beneficial for you to interact more with her. However, Emily's identity in reality is a bit mysterious. You should pay attention to this so that others don't gossip about you." Amy's was one of the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle and was responsible for monitoring and investigating the various nobles and high officials of the Empire. He was a person who was completely active in the political arena of the Dark Mantle and was a powerful person who held great power. Han Shuo didn't expect that Emily was his younger sister. In addition, there seemed to be some problems with Emily's other identity that Candide spoke of. This caused Han Shuo to be a bit surprised. He didn't know what Candide's words were referring to. "So you still don't know about this? I'll give you a hint, and you'll be fine as long as you pay attention to it. Let's leave it at that. She's already taken a look at your information and can easily find you. Come see me after you and her complete the mission," Candide said as he looked at Han Shuo. Chapter 125. When he left the Dark Mantle, Han Shuo gave Chester some instructions and told him to wait for his news. Han Shuo didn't linger after exiting the Dark Mantle and returned to the academy. When he was about to arrive at the academy, he got off the car and walked to the graveyard behind the mountain, entering the mausoleum that led to the Cemetery of Death. He didn't return to the Cemetery of Death from this place. Han Shuo rubbed his space ring and took out the brain-shaped fruit of Dagmar. Han Shuo used a special container to seal the 3 fruits of Dagmar. Han Shuo took out one of the fruits of Dagmar and observed it for a moment. He discovered that this fruit of Dagmar wasn't outstanding on the outside and looked a bit ugly. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo sat down cross-legged and hesitated for a moment before swallowing the fruit of Dagmar that was only a bit bigger than a fist. It tasted a bit bitter and hard to chew. Compared to normal fruits, this fruit of Dagmar was quite unpleasant to eat. When Han Shuo had completely swallowed the fruit of Dagmar, he immediately circulated his magical yuan and started circulating it, slowly condensing it towards his head. Nothing out of the ordinary happened in the beginning, but after a while, Han Shuo slowly began to feel that something wasn't right. Waves of strange whirlpool-like energy emanated from his abdomen, rising from his lower abdomen and spinning towards his head. This strange whirlpool-like energy caused a piercing pain that seeped into the bone wherever it passed. Even with the tenacity of Han Shua's body and the firmness of his will, he still felt that it was a bit unbearable. When these waves of strange energy flowed into Han Shua's head, Han Shua's mind was greatly shaken, as if hundreds of cannonballs had exploded at the same time. Booms continuously rang out in his head. Along with the ferocious roars was a bone-piercing pain in his brain. After his brain had been developed by magical yuan, the sensitivity of his 5 senses had greatly increased. Han Shua could feel that the patterns on both sides of his brain seemed to be filled to the brim with this whirlpool-like power. It was somewhat similar to Han Shua's expansion of meridians. Because of the fruit of Dagmar, Han Shua's brain was being developed bit by bit in a miraculous manner. This process was so strange and mysterious that even Han Shua himself didn't know what was happening. The intense pain had already completely submerged Han Shua. If it were an ordinary person, they would basically become an idiot or a lunatic under the intense stimulation of the brain. This was because the human brain was the most complicated thing in the world. Any abnormal change in the brain could cause an earth-shattering change in a person. This kind of bone-piercing pain that penetrated deep into the human heart would immediately cause a normal person to go insane and never recover. Even someone as mentally tough as Han Shua, under the effects of the fruit of Dagmar and the constant protection of the magical yuan, was tormented to the point of hovering between life and death. Others would have no choice but to die. His entire body trembling, Han Shua sat cross-legged, sweat pouring down like rain. A roar that hadn't been released in a long time once again erupted from Han Shua's mouth uncontrollably. In the end, the ground Han Shua sat on was drenched in sweat. His originally low roars gradually weakened, and his lips trembled just like his body. After maintaining this position for a long time, Han Shua fell stiffly onto the moist ground, falling into unconsciousness in an instant. After an unknown amount of time, Han Shua slowly woke up. When he woke up, Han Shua felt a splitting headache, and his entire body ached. Raising his head and moving his body, Han Shua's heart was immediately filled with ecstasy. In the dusky tomb, Han Shua could even clearly see the minute veins on the stone slab a few meters above his head. Although Han Shua's vision had always been very clear, the feeling now was even more magical. Han Shua almost didn't dare believe it in that moment. When he observed his surroundings, Han Shua's amazement overflowed when he discovered that he could clearly see everything within the dusky tomb if he looked closely. His 2 eyes seemed to have become magnifying glasses, and when he slowly and casually gazed at something a few meters away, the distance seemed to be pulled closer bit by bit. What was originally a small would slowly be magnified, and finally, Han Shua could see it with incomparable clarity. This feeling was quite peculiar, and Han Shua understood that this was definitely due to the effects of the fruit of Dagmar. If he couldn't immediately consume the fruit of Dagmar again, then Han Shua would have wanted nothing more than to consume the remaining 2. In his ecstasy, Han Shua sat down and meditated for a while. Indeed, he discovered that the concentration and circulation speed of his mental strength had also greatly increased. In this way, the speed at which Han Shua obtained mental strength through meditation could be further increased. When using magic against others and his mental strength was exhausted, Han Shua's recovery speed through meditation would definitely be far greater than that of an ordinary person. This meant that whether it was training or fighting, Han Shua would be able to obtain a faster tempo than ordinary mages. The overjoyed Han Shua didn't continue to stay here. Now that he felt that his mental strength had improved, Han Shua decided to continue advancing to the next level of necromancy magic. By now, Han Shua had completely grasped and could skillfully use the basic necromancy magic. As his mental strength increased, Han Shua was confident that he would be able to make breakthroughs even faster. It looked like it wouldn't be a difficult task to advance to an adept mage and graduate from the necromancy major in a short period of time. When Han Shua had been injured a few days ago, he'd studied the intermediate level magic by himself for a few days. Han Shuo was still a bit unfamiliar with some of the knowledge within. Now that he'd returned, it looked like it was time to ask Fanny for an explanation. After crawling out of the tomb, the outside was covered in silver. The sky was bright, and it had actually snowed heavily. The heavy snow enveloped the scenery in all directions, turning it into a world of white snow as far as the eye could see. The cold wind blew down, and his originally wet body suddenly felt a bit cold. In this world of ice and snow, Han Shuo changed out of his wet clothes and faced the world of silver naked. After looking into the distance, his vision greatly increased. If Han Shuo's eyes could be said to have the effect of a magnifying glass when he was in the tomb, then when he walked out of the tomb and gazed into the distance, Han Shuo's eyes continuously expanded. It was as if he'd gained the function of a telescope, taking in the scenery from extremely far away. The hissing sounds of a few small animals in the surrounding trees, as well as the sound of the wind blowing in the surroundings, were all so clear under the careful listening of Han Shuo. It was so miraculous that Han Shuo almost couldn't help but want to howl out loud. Although Han Shuo's current physical body didn't fear the changing seasons at all, in order to not appear too out of the ordinary, Han Shuo still took out a new set of thicker clothes from his space ring and changed into them. He wrapped up his naked body and walked in the direction of the necromancy major. Under the cover of the heavy snow, the scenery had a unique charm. Bits and pieces of his time with Fanny constantly surfaced in Han Shuo's mind as he walked. However, every time he thought of his current relationship with Emily, Han Shuo didn't quite dare face Fanny. As soon as he arrived at the Dark Major, ear-splitting shouts immediately sounded in Han Shuo's ears. The voices were filled with excitement and shouts, as if some grand banquet was being held. Han Shuo was stunned and didn't know what was happening. Because there were many buildings in the way to the Dark Major, Han Shuo couldn't see anything with his astonishing eyesight. The distance of a few hundred meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Han Shuo didn't need to release the original demons to observe, so he quickened his footsteps and quickly walked over. The Dark Major's plaza was filled with numerous teachers and students. There were students of the Dark Major and Necromancy Major, as well as teachers and students of other magic majors. There were even a few knights and swordsmen mixed in. It was an extremely bustling scene. After accommodating over 100 people, the enormous plaza also seemed a bit crowded. Many of the students on the periphery squeezed in with all their might. There were even a few dirty fellows who stared at some of the female students and did their best to lean on them, causing light shouts and screams to ring out. After arriving here, Han Shuo had originally planned on using the original demons to spy, but he felt strong magical pulses in the surroundings. It looked like a magical boundary had been set up in the plaza. It wouldn't be good if he accidentally let the original demons collide with the magical boundary and attract the attention of others. Therefore, after only a moment's hesitation, Han Shuo didn't release the original demons. Instead, he relied on his tough physical body and similarly squeezed in. Under Han Shuo's forceful squeeze, the few thunder mages in front of him glared angrily at Han Shuo. However, Han Shuo didn't care at all and ignored them as he forced his way through. The gap between these people's thin and weak bodies and Han Shuo's wasn't small. They were easily pushed aside by Han Shuo and forced a path in. His extraordinary vision came into play at this moment. Han Shuo saw Lisa in front of him and immediately pushed aside the others around him, squeezing his way towards Lisa. Along the way, everyone frowned and cursed under their breath. When he reached Lisa's side, Han Shuo saw a wretched-looking swordsman staring shiftily at Lisa's now towering breasts, attempting to get closer to Lisa and take advantage of the situation. Now that Han Shuo had arrived inside, he discovered that a magical boundary had been set up in the plaza. A group of people seemed to be in the middle of a magical contest. No wonder it had attracted the attention of all parties. Lisa was paying full attention to the exciting fight in the plaza and would shout loudly from time to time. She was just as excited as Amy and Athena beside her and didn't care about the prying eyes of others at all. The swordsman finally made it to Lisa's side with great difficulty. He stared at Lisa's breasts with a lustful look, licking his face as he moved closer, wanting to take advantage of the situation. With a bang, Han Shuo suddenly appeared midway and abruptly rammed into the swordsman who was trying to get close to Lisa. He directly pushed the swordsman into the crowd of male wind mages behind him, receiving a round of curses and a few vicious punches in the back. Han Shuo then smiled merrily at the swordsman who had just come to a stop in the distance. He stood contentedly next to Lisa, and even purposefully rammed forward, leaning against Lisa's back. The swordsman, who was about to succeed, showed an angry and gloomy expression when Han Shuo did this. He raised his middle finger at Han Shuo from afar, and mouthed to Han Shuo, "You cut the line." Shrugging his shoulders, Han Shuo had a proud look on his face, and also slowly mouthed, "How about it?" Rolling his eyes, the swordsman felt a bit helpless. His eyes darted around in a circle, and he intended to search for another target. It was at this moment that Lisa suddenly exerted force from the back of her elbow and suddenly bombarded Han Shuo's chest, catching Han Shuo off guard. However, an attack of this level was basically useless against Han Shuo's body. However, the swordsman on the other side immediately showed an expression of schadenfreude and looked excitedly at Han Shuo, preparing to be unlucky. Another blind guy coming over to take advantage of me. How annoying. Lisa called out in an impatient low voice, and then turned her head to glare angrily over. However, when she saw that it was actually Han Shuo, she immediately showed a pleasantly surprised expression and hastily asked Han Shuo, why are you back? I didn't know it was you. Did I hurt you just now?" Seeing that the guy on the other side was gloating and waiting for him to be unlucky, Han Shuo pretended to rub his chest, showing an expression that seemed to be in great pain. Lisa was greatly shocked and immediately reached out her small hand in a panic, rubbing Han Shuo's chest. Because it was already crowded here, Lisa was already pressed against Han Shuo's chest when she did this. The swordsman, who'd been waiting to see Han Shuo's misfortune, was immediately flabbergasted when he saw this situation occur. A proud smile hung on Han Shuo's face, and he mouthed to the swordsman in the distance, "I'm awesome, aren't I?" The swordsman didn't say anything else, and stuck his thumb out at Han Shuo from afar, indicating that he admired Han Shuo's awesomeness. He then turned his head and fixed his eyes on the other girl, squeezing through the crowd again. It looked like he wanted to try and see if he could have the same romantic encounter as Han Shuo. By this time, Han Shuo could already clearly see the battle taking place in the plaza. Therefore, he watched the fight between the dark major students and the light major students and searched for traces of Fanny in the crowd. Chapter 126. Every winter, according to tradition, the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force would host a competition between schools. The winners would receive generous prizes to motivate the students to study even harder. This was the time when the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force was at its busiest. The competition between the various majors was no longer just for the prizes, but also concerned the reputation of a major and the teachers' faces. Even the future of the teachers of each major was tightly linked to this competition. Therefore, at this time every year, all the faculties would send out their strongest students to participate in this competition. On one hand, it was for the sake of the students themselves, and on the other hand, it was for the sake of the teachers of each faculty and their future status in the academy. The dark major and light major had always been sworn enemies, and had fought openly and covertly with each other for many years. The competition between the dark major and light major this time was for the sake of obtaining the title of first major. This was why so many spectators had come. An enormous magical barrier enveloped the entire plaza. With the premise that no lives would be lost, the dark major and light major had each sent 5 people to participate. A good show was currently playing out in the plaza. Han Shuo's gaze roamed all around, finally spotting Fanny sitting in the back corner amidst the row of teachers at the front desk. The stands had been raised a bit higher, and there were teachers of each major, including the dean. It looked like they were paying a great deal of attention to this time's competition. "Is there anyone from our necromancy major participating?" Lisa explained the situation to Han Shuo. Han Shuo was startled for a moment and then asked Lisa. Shaking her head, Lisa said, "Our necromancy major is a branch of the dark major. Because the dark major teachers and students are afraid that we'll drag them down, they didn't even count us in this time's competition. Therefore, It's been the Dark Major students fighting from beginning to end, and our Necromancy Major doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. So that's how it is. Who do you think will win this time, Light Major or Dark Major? Han Shuo stared at the two people in the center of the plaza and asked casually, I don't know. The Dark Major and Light Major have always been the two strongest majors in the academy. For so many years, the two departments had taken turns to obtain the title of the number one department in the academy, and no department had been able to keep winning. The Dark Major obtained victory last year, but the team leader of the Dark Major has already graduated and left, while the person from the Light Major is still here. I think the Dark Major is in a bit of danger this time. Lisa observed the situation in the plaza and explained to Han Shuo. AI. It's a pity that there's nothing about our Necromancy Major. For so many years, the Dark Major has always excluded us in every competition. Although Master Fanny and Master Jean have worked very hard, because of this, their status in the academy has been deteriorating day by day. Look, Master Fanny can only sit in the last row, and Master Jean doesn't even dare appear here because he's afraid that others will laugh at him. Our Necromancy Major has really failed. Amy said dejectedly, shaking her head. There's nothing we can do about it. The dark creatures that our Necromancy Major summons are naturally countered by light magic. Without the help of summoned creatures, it's very difficult for necromancers to gain the upper hand against light major attacks. It's no wonder that Master Fanny can only helplessly accept the Dark Major's arrangements and not let us participate, because that's just asking for trouble. Athena was similarly dejected as she chatted idly with Amy. The plaza wasn't completely flat and unobstructed. On the contrary, there were all sorts of fake mountains and trees placed in the spacious plaza, and uneven ravines had been added to the ground. Because they wanted the students to get used to the real environment, the battlefield was a bit more complicated. At this moment, the 5 Dark Major and Light Major students were in the plaza, using fake trees and strange rocks to conceal their bodies. They would occasionally take the opportunity to attack each other and then use the terrain to retreat or regroup with their teammates. The plaza that was protected by an enormous magical barrier appeared to be dimly lit. It looked like this effect was also purposefully made to facilitate better teamwork. Both sides were testing each other out at this moment and hadn't truly clashed yet. Suddenly, a member of the Dark Major suddenly clutched his stomach and collapsed. Cold sweat seeped out of his forehead and his face was deathly white. Dark Archmage Deo's face abruptly changed when he saw this happen. He immediately said to Dean Emma, Dean, Philide seems to be feeling unwell. I'd like to pause the match and take a look at the situation. Space Grand Magus Emma also looked with a bit of astonishment at Philide, who'd fallen to the ground. She seemed to find it strange that Philide would suddenly collapse before the true battle had even begun. She nodded when she heard Deo's words. Let's pause for a moment and see what's going on with Deo? Emma then waved her hand, and the enormous magical barrier suddenly lit up. The other Dark Major students brought the pained Philide in front of Deo. Dark Archmage Deo and a few other Dark Major teachers surrounded Philide and examined him. In the end, Deo's face darkened as he said to Emma, Dean, Philide ate some food that he shouldn't have. I don't think he can participate in the competition this time. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Apparently, Philide is about to graduate as well and is about to become an adept mage in the Dark Major. He's currently the captain of the Dark Major and has the highest strength. If he suddenly can't compete, then the Dark Major has even less hope this time. Athena looked at Philide's pale face from afar and said with some worry. Lisa nodded and said, Yes, the Light Major's Keelung was the captain of the Light Major last year. It's said that Keelung already has the strength of an adept mage, but he's purposefully delayed his advancement for this time's match. Originally, Philide would have been able to put up a fight, but now that something like this has happened, it looks like the Dark Major has no hope at all. Han Shua's ears were sharp as he watched Emma and the others in the distance. He could clearly hear Emma and Deo's conversation. Because of Philide's problem, Deo tried to convince Dean Emma to postpone the match for a few days. However, Emma used the Academy's rules as a reason and refused Deo's suggestion. She only agreed to have Deo send out another Dark Major student to fight in Philide's place. An enraged Deo argued with Emma in a shrill voice, saying that this was a conspiracy and insisting that Emma change the schedule of the match. It was a pity that Archmage Deo was only a dark major teacher after all, and naturally couldn't compare to Dean Emma. Deo, who was unable to convince Emma, said furiously, "Since this is the case, then we won't compete. Others can say whatever they want this time. Master Deo, please be mindful of your status. Although a bit of an accident has occurred, I hope you don't want to change the Academy's traditions. Please find a replacement for this time's match and smoothly finish it." Emma, who had always had a kind expression, was obviously a bit angry as she stared at Deo and said solemnly. Emma was able to sit in the position of Dean of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force not only because she herself was a Space Grand Magus, but also because she also possessed an unquestionable dignity. Deo was immediately dumbfounded when such a serious warning left her mouth. Thinking for a moment with a darkened face, Deo turned to look at Fanny in the corner and said, "Master Fanny, the Necromancy Major has never participated in so many years of matches. I'm thinking that the Necromancy Major should also send out someone to take Philide's place and continue the match this time." Fanny, who had been sitting in the back row and looking expressionlessly at the surrounding situation, immediately started when she heard Deo's words. She then suddenly reacted and her charming face changed color, full of anger as she said, "Master Deo, what do you mean by this?" Anyone who understood could see that Deo was purposefully saying this to Fanny because Philide had left and he knew that he had no way of winning. Adding to that his anger towards Dean Emma, Deo had purposefully said this to her. Even if he lost this way, those with discerning eyes could see that Deo's actions were completely because he was in a bad mood. After all, the Necromancy Major was famed for being weak. If Deo wanted to fight, he wouldn't choose the Necromancy Major. Deo's actions were obviously looking down on the Necromancy Major, and could even be said to be an insult. Master Fanny, as a part of the Dark Major, the Necromancy Major should also put in some effort for the Dark Major, don't you think so? A Dark Major teacher on the side naturally understood Deo's meaning and spoke up after thinking for a moment. Some of the teachers next to Fanny looked at Fanny, rejoicing in her misfortune. Of course, there were also some who revealed looks of sympathy. However, the Necromancy Major was famed for being weak, so no one expressed anything. Most of them looked like they were watching a good show. Why didn't you think of the Necromancy Major normally? You found someone to be your shield at this time, yet you've thought of our Major. I don't agree with this. Without the Necromancy Major students participating, Fanny's face had already lost all light. She had only hoped that the match would end quickly, so that she wouldn't have to endure the ridicule and sympathy of others. Who would have thought that she would be insulted by Deo in the end? This immediately triggered Fanny's temper. Han Shuo was well aware that Fanny was soft on the outside but hard on the inside. Under normal circumstances, Fanny would treat others with a smile and wouldn't argue with others. However, once someone crossed her bottom line, Fanny wouldn't show any weakness and would resist. This time, Deo had obviously crossed Fanny's bottom line. The conversations of the teachers in the stands weren't able to be transmitted to this side. Lisa and the others were all baffled and didn't know why Fanny had suddenly stood up in anger. When they heard Han Shuo explain with a dark face, they were all enraged and cursed Deo for his shamelessness. His strong body was put to good use at this moment, pushing aside anyone who stood in his way. Han Shuo walked to the stands amidst the students' curses and suddenly said in a loud voice, "Master Fanny, I wish to fight in Philide's place. I hope you will allow me." Seeing Fanny being insulted, Han Shuo could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. He shouted with a serious face, his voice loud and clear, traveling far and wide from the stands. The surroundings of the plaza were silent for a moment, and then immediately exploded into a huge hubbub. Everyone's gazes instantly gathered on Han Shuo's side, brimming with curiosity and excitement, as if they wanted to figure out what was going on. Who is this person? He's got some guts. Humph, he's overestimating himself. Even Philide knows that he's no match for our Major, and pretended to be sick to withdraw. To think that someone would invite humiliation. Isn't that our Major's Brian? When did he return? Chatter and chatter immediately rang through the entire plaza. All the teachers, students, and teachers looked curiously at Han Shuo and inquired about Han Shuo's background and identity from the people around them. Fanny started and her eyes sparkled when she saw Han Shuo appear. A beautiful smile blossomed on her enraged face as she said softly to Han Shuo, "Forget it. Can't you see that someone is purposefully using us as a shield?" Nodding, Han Shuo looked at the nonchalant Deo with a dark face and said to Fanny, "I know, but I still want to give it a try. Our necromancy major has been quiet for so long. It's time for us to appear in everyone's eyes." The competition this time concerned the status of the teachers in the future. As a teacher of the necromancy major, Fanny was now being framed by Deo and the others. Han Shuo naturally wouldn't allow this to continue. Han Shuo's resolute gaze seemed to reveal some sort of message. Fanny looked dazedly at Han Shuo for a few seconds and finally nodded. She said to Deo, "All right, I agree to your request. Let him fight in Philide's place." After a while, Han Shuo's identity was quickly revealed through the necromancy major students. His experiences from his life as an errand boy to the Dark Forest were known to all the teachers and students in the plaza in a short amount of time. In particular, the old witch Camilla's mouth revealed the anecdotes of Fanny and Han Shuo being in the same room late at night, and Han Shuo being in Fanny's bed. This filled everyone's imaginations with endless fanciful thoughts. The sounds of discussion grew louder and louder, and everyone's gazes on Han Shuo became more and more heated. "It's decided then. He'll replace Philide and immediately fight the light major. Go up and make a gesture. It won't take too much time if it ends early." Deo nodded and said to Fanny. Chapter 127. Under Deo's cold gaze, Han Shuo nodded woodenly and didn't say much. He only looked deeply at Fanny and walked towards the magical boundary within the plaza. When he arrived next to Dean Emma, Emma looked kindly at Han Shuo and asked kindly, "You're called Brian?" Han Shuo started and looked suspiciously at Dean Emma, saying, "That's right. How did you know?" "Heh, of course I know you. You were the one who contributed greatly to the necromancy major in the Dark Forest. Go in and have a good fight. You're a pretty good fellow." Emma looked merrily at Han Shuo and said slowly. Han Shuo felt that Emma's words seemed to have another meaning from Emma's gaze, but Han Shuo didn't understand what Emma meant. He didn't pursue the matter and nodded politely to Dean Emma, walking towards the plaza. After Emma opened the magical boundary, Han Shuo, the Dark Major group, and the 5 Light Major students all walked into the plaza. Han Shuo suddenly discovered that the interior was vastly different from what he saw from the outside as soon as he entered. Although the interior of the plaza felt dimly lit from the outside, he could still make out the general outlines of everything within. However, when Han Shuo walked in himself, he discovered that the interior of the plaza was much darker than the outside. There was even a faint mist curling around the surroundings. The existence of all sorts of trees, fake mountains, and ravines made the entire plaza seem like a battlefield with many obstacles. Han Shuo didn't dare release the original demons within the magical boundary. After all, there were many observers outside. Not only were there archmages of various majors, but there was also Dean Emma, who was a space grand magus. With so many strong people watching and the existence of the boundary, Han Shuo didn't dare risk releasing the original demons. But even without the use of the original demons, Han Shuo, whose brain had been developed, wasn't affected by the mist and darkness in the slightest. His hearing and eyesight were far superior to any of the other students present. Using his eyesight, Han Shuo discovered that the group of 5 from the light department, led by Qilong, seemed to be setting up something. On the other hand, the 4 members of the dark faction hung their heads dejectedly, as if they were only willing to fight after bracing themselves. Come to think of it, after losing Fred, they knew from Dior's conversation that Dior had given up on this battle. Letting them fight was just a formality. Of course, they didn't want to go on stage and lose face in a battle that they were bound to lose, but they couldn't disobey Dior's orders. It was no wonder that they were dejected and had no morale. From the moment they entered the arena, the group of 4 from the Dark Major hadn't discussed any details of the fight with Han Shuo. It looked like they really did plan on doing as Deo had said, and just casually came up. Han Shuo was standing next to the four of them, so he didn't say anything when he saw their expressions. He only chanted a series of magical incantations, summoning a few little skull and zombie warriors. As Han Shuo chanted, the speed at which the little skull and zombie warriors appeared was a bit faster than usual. 6 skeletal warriors and 3 zombie warriors appeared in the arena in the blink of an eye. There seemed to be no gap between them, and their speed was surprisingly fast. Oh, this fellow's speed of summoning incantations is surprisingly fast. So many summoned creatures have appeared in the blink of an eye. The crowd of onlookers were filled with magic students and teachers from all over. They naturally understood that the speed at which a spell was chanted had to be in perfect harmony with the speed at which mental strength was condensed. If the gap between 2 spells was very short, that meant that the speed at which mental strength was condensed was also very fast. Therefore, when they saw Han Shuo summon so many dark creatures so quickly, they all revealed astonished looks. Even Dean Emma's eyes lit up as she looked at Han Shuo, full of interest, as if very curious about what Han Shuo was preparing to do. Light magic is the bane of dark creatures. Rather than wasting mental strength to summon dark creatures, he might as well save it for necromancy magic. A dark major teacher said mockingly as he looked at Han Shuo. Fanny was sitting next to him, and these words were obviously meant for Fanny to hear. Fanny's face turned angry as she snorted softly, but she didn't say anything. Han Shuo couldn't help but be secretly delighted after summoning these skeletal warriors and zombie warriors. Han Shuo could feel that summoning so many dark creatures in the past had expended quite a bit of mental strength. However, after summoning so many dark creatures this time, Han Shuo felt that the mental strength expenditure was almost negligible. This meant that because of the effects of the fruit, Han Shuo's mental strength had also increased in passing. The delighted Han Shuo once again chanted necromancy magic, and a few more skeletal warriors and zombie warriors appeared on the ground, as well as a few ghouls. When summoning these dark creatures, Han Shuo had already left the dark major students by himself and arrived at the leftmost corner of the plaza. There were fake mountains and fake trees in the surroundings, and there was also the lingering mist. Therefore, the light major and dark major students couldn't see what Han Shuo was doing. After the dark creatures had come out, they brandished the weapons in their hands according to Han Shuo's orders and quickly started setting up traps. Rope after rope was used to dig a bigger and deeper trench, setting up a trap. The skeletal warriors used bone knives to work quickly, while the ghouls quickly moved the soil and piled it up in front, forming a wall that blocked people from entering. Then, the zombie warriors used the wooden sticks in their hands to pound the loose soil into a thicker layer. The 3 types of dark creatures began to methodically work together under the control of Han Shuo's mental strength. Under the watchful eyes of the teachers and students of the various majors outside the plaza, he openly set up the sinister traps, as if he were a calm hunter on the hunt. In the beginning, everyone had been waiting to watch a joke. But when they saw so many dark creatures come out and quickly get to work setting up the traps, their expressions changed from amusement to caution. As long as a necromancer's mental strength is strong enough, they can summon an endless stream of dark creatures. Only a necromancer can use large amounts of dark creatures to complete some projects that require large amounts of manual labor. This advantage is something that no other major can compare to. This kid's methods make full use of the necromancy major's advantage of being able to use dark creatures. His mind is quite nimble. I think that the match this time will be a bit interesting. Dean Emma smiled faintly as she flicked a glance at Deo of the dark major. Snorting lightly, Deo's expression was still cold as he said, "Once these traps are set up, people will only fall for them if they want to lure them in. I think that this necromancy kid will have a hard time accomplishing this. When he appears in front of the light major student's door, a wave of magical attacks will be enough to take him down. Then all the traps he's set up will be useless." As he spoke, Deo couldn't help but feel a bit of regret. He thought that if he'd instructed the other 4 to work together with Han Shuo earlier, they might have been able to lure the light major students into the traps. Perhaps an accident really would have happened. It was a pity that the match had officially begun at this time, and Deo had no way to go about it no matter how much he regretted it. He could only coldly observe everything that was happening in the plaza. Fanny's bright eyes focused on Han Shua's body, not relaxing for even a moment. She didn't even pay attention to the mocking and ridicule of those around her. Some people say that a man is the most charming when he's doing something seriously. At this moment, Han Shua's expression was calm, his movements unhurried, and the corners of his mouth even carried a calm self-confidence. Add to that the fact that Han Shua's current actions were all for Fanny. So the current Han Shua did indeed have an inexplicable and wonderful attraction for Fanny. Because of the magical boundary, the noise and scenery outside the plaza were all blocked out when he entered the plaza. Therefore, after Han Shua entered, he couldn't see anything outside of the magical boundary. The dark creatures were still busily working. Having given the order, Han Shua began to walk in the shadows of the large trees and fake mountains. He was like a shadow, silently approaching the center of the light major and dark major students. Han Shua's movements weren't big, and he didn't deliberately display his agility or speed. However, Han Shua's vision of the scenery, as well as his control of the various gaps, had already reached a godly level. Between the shadows of the large trees and fake mountains, there would usually be a bright area that needed to be passed through. As long as the other students paid a little attention, they would be able to see someone passing through. When these students walked, they would constantly turn their heads to observe their surroundings. Usually, the instant they shifted their gazes or just happened to blink, Han Shua would suddenly pass through the two shadows. This kind of momentary gap was as difficult as ascending to the heavens for most people. It could even be said to be a godly skill. However, the current Han Shua had truly done it. Therefore, no one was able to discover any traces of Han Shua, who had been moving stealthily in the shadows, all the way to the fake mountains in the center of the light major and dark major students. The teachers and students observing from the outside were also very curious as to why they didn't seem to notice Han Shua when he was slowly approaching them. This strange phenomenon made them feel that something was off. However, Emma and the other archmages with her astonishing eyesight all noticed this anomaly at the same time. Emma's eyes lit up, but she didn't say anything. However, the wind and water archmages exchanged a look of shock. They hadn't been paying much attention to him before, but they instantly focused their attention on Han Shua. Deo's face darkened even more. He hadn't thought that Han Shua would have such exaggerated judgment and eyesight. His gaze involuntarily flickered to Fanny behind him as he was shocked. He didn't know if Han Shua's miraculous abilities had been taught to him by Fanny. Han Shua had stopped in the shadows of a fake mountain, his body frozen in place. The light major students spread out and stood up, their footsteps light and slow as they paid attention to their surroundings. They slowly approached the dark major and even used the surrounding trees and fake mountains to conceal their tracks. It looked like they hadn't underestimated their enemy because of Philide's retreat. On the other hand, the four dark major students lazily approached the center with sullen expressions. Their mouths were constantly grumbling, as if expressing the grievances in their hearts. In their current state, they would probably be defeated in the first wave of light major attacks. Suddenly, a light major student approached Han Shua's side and set his eyes on the fake mountain in the shadows where Han Shua was hiding. He kept an eye on the direction the dark major student would appear in as he approached Han Shua's fake mountain without any precautions. This light major student was about 10 steps away from the person closest to him. When he first arrived, he glanced at the surroundings of the fake mountain. When he didn't see anything out of the ordinary, he didn't pay too much attention to it. He let down his guard and walked in. Han Shua's body seemed to have merged into one with the shadows. He stood there as still as a boulder. The spectators outside all breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the light major student approach Han Shua's shadow. The entire area suddenly became deathly silent. Suddenly, Han Shua, who was in the shadows of the fake mountain, was like a demon hidden in the darkness. A pair of demonic arms suddenly spread out, one hand covering the light major's mouth and the other suddenly grabbing onto his body, dragging the light major student into the darkness. While the light major student's face was filled with shock, Han Shua punched the back of his head. The light major student's body went limp, and he immediately fainted. In the darkness, Han Shuo dragged the light major student into the shadows and quickly changed their clothes. Soon after, he openly walked out of the shadows and slowly approached the center. The 5 light major students were about 10 steps away from each other, just enough for them to see the person next to them. But because of the fog and darkness, they could only determine who they were from their clothes and couldn't clearly see their faces. Adding to the fact that their winter clothes were thicker and their bodies were a little bloated, Han Shuo's appearance didn't attract anyone's attention. It was a pity that the teachers and students outside the plaza had seen everything that had happened. The clamor outside had already reached a frenzied state. The necromancy major's entourage had suddenly become the main characters at this moment. Lisa and the others' crazed cries sounded so high even in the noisy plaza. My gosh, unbelievable. He can actually take down someone just like that. The 5 light major students have been observing for a long time. How could they not have noticed his approach? How is this possible? He's now a member of the light major. I think the light major's in big trouble this time. Haha, a teammate next to them has suddenly become a ticking time bomb and no one knows about it. This is quite interesting. Incredulous discussions rose and fell. The students still found it a bit hard to believe, but the truth was right in front of them and they had no choice but to believe it. Master Fanny, this student of yours is quite interesting. Beside her, Dao's aloof face had softened quite a bit. He looked at Fanny, who also had a normal expression, but her eyebrows were twitching slightly and she was obviously suppressing her excitement. Feeling a wave of comfort in her heart, Fanny flicked a cold glance at Dao and said mockingly, "How could I? I just had someone make up the numbers. Master Dao overpraises me." Dao didn't say much after being deflated. His expression was also a bit nervous as his gaze swept around the plaza, paying attention to the subsequent developments. Fanny's heart was filled with joy at this moment. Because of the weakness of her major, Fanny had always suffered the mockery and sarcasm of others. Now, because of Han Shuo's rise to prominence, the gazes of others on her were full of surprise and incredulity. Dao didn't even retort when people ridiculed him. This made Fanny's heart overflow with joy. Everyone had their vanity, especially Fanny, who was often struck down by others. Now that the situation had suddenly reversed, Fanny's joy and comfort were 100 times more intense. When she looked at Han Shuo again, she felt that he was pleasing to the eye no matter how she looked at him. The corners of her mouth unconsciously curved into a sweet smile. Within the arena, Han Shuo naturally didn't know that his performance had already caused a huge uproar outside the arena. He calmly and heavily strode forward, slowly approaching the center with the other 4 light major students. The 4 dark major students gradually appeared from another direction. They were also in a loose formation, maintaining a suitable distance between each other. When they saw the 5 light major students, the 4 dark major students' footsteps abruptly halted. 2 sleeping spells and 2 hand of darkness spells were chanted from the mouths of the 4 dark major students. The 2 sleeping spells formed a ring and floated towards Han Shuo and the light major students on the other side. 2 enormous palms also suddenly formed in the dusky sky, grabbing towards the other 2 light major students. The captain of the light major, Qi Lung, coldly watched all of this with indifference, because not a single one of the dark major's attacks landed on him. Perhaps they themselves knew that these moves were ineffective against Qi Lung. Han Shuo also suffered the attack of a sleeping spell. At this moment, his body slanted and he quickly took a few steps, already dodging the dark major student's sleeping spells. The student standing next to Han Shuo didn't panic even after the hand of darkness appeared above his head. A radiant sword suddenly appeared, striking towards the hand of darkness in the air. At this moment, a bone spear appeared out of nowhere, followed closely by another bone spear, stabbing towards the radiant sword with lightning speed. 2 popping sounds rang out as the bone spear and the radiant sword turned into white light and dissipated. At the same time, an agony of the soul spell appeared in front of the light major student along with the hand of darkness. The sudden change completely disrupted the light major student's thoughts. The other 2 light major students who had dodged the dark major's attack only paused when they heard Qi Lung's yell. They immediately joined up with Qilong and attacked Han Shuo. At this moment, Han Shuo gave a long laugh and raised his voice. Those who have fainted and fallen are already out. You three against the five of us. I think it won't be easy for you to win. Han Shuo didn't continue to stay in place after he'd spoken, and ran towards the trap that had been set up earlier with the speed that a normal mage should have. Qilong and the other two froze for a second, and then Qilong said resolutely, "Take down this guy first. The other 4 dark major students have lost their will to fight, so we'll take care of them last." The other 2 from the light major nodded at the same time when they heard Qilong's words, and rushed towards Han Shuo with Qilong. The remaining 4 dark major students looked at each other, and then one of them shouted, "Damn it, there's 5 of us now. What are the 3 of them afraid of? Let's take them out together." In this way, Han Shuo could be seen running forward with the 3 light major students chasing fiercely from behind. Behind Qilong and the other 2, the 4 dark major students chased fiercely after Qilong and the other 2, forming a strange scene. There was a hubbub of noise outside the arena at this moment. If one were to say that Han Shuo had just taken down someone in the shadows, then there was still some element of luck involved. However, when he fought with Qilong afterwards and used the speed of his magic release to injure Qilong's buttocks, this already proved that Han Shuo's strength was absolutely out of the ordinary. Add to that the fact that they'd seen the trap that Han Shuo had set up earlier, and now that they saw Han Shuo run in that direction, the onlookers immediately knew that Han Shuo was harboring some sinister intentions. "Oh, damn it. Why is it like this?" Light Archmage Voigtlander, who'd always had the smile of victory in his grasp, couldn't help but groan at this moment. The appearance of this kind of situation was obviously completely outside of his expectations. "Master Fanny, this student of yours is quite impressive. Who would have thought that the necromancy major would have such a talent? It's truly inconceivable." All of a sudden, the attitudes of the teachers who'd often ridiculed Fanny suddenly changed, and they all spoke to Fanny with emotion. This moment was the most glorious and proud moment that Fanny had been in the necromancy major for so many years. Han Shuo's actions had won the respect of everyone for Fanny. Wild with joy, Fanny smiled slightly in a reserved manner and said faintly, "It's nothing much. Our necromancy major is full of talents. It's just that everyone keeps a low profile. Now you should know how shallow your previous knowledge was." When these words were spoken, the teachers on the side looked at each other in astonishment. They hadn't thought that because of Han Shuo's sudden rise, Fanny's aura would immediately rise as well. Chapter 128. Amidst the clamor outside the plaza, Han Shuo's body leapt through the wall that the zombie warriors had created earlier and landed on the flat ground behind it. A few steps behind Han Shuo was the trap that the skeletal warriors had dug. There were a few tree branches blocking the mouth of the trap, and the ghouls had covered the outside with mud. It looked very normal. The dark creatures that had completed their mission dispersed under Han Shuo's command, hiding behind the surrounding trees and fake mountains. Then, Han Shuo stood behind the earthen wall and once again released bone spears and bone arrows to attack the 3 light major students that were quickly approaching. "Humph, you're asking for trouble if you want to fight openly." Qilong approached and 2 radiant sword slashes flew out from the front, destroying the attacks that Han Shuo had shot at him. Then, together with the other 2 students, they quickly closed in on Han Shuo. The other 2 students, who were about to reach Han Shuo, also chanted magical incantations and blasted down the earthen wall that Han Shuo had just piled up. One of them had just stepped in when Han Shuo saw him step on the rope and abruptly gave an order to the zombie he was controlling. The zombie warrior standing in the distance suddenly tightened its grip on the rope, and the loose rope abruptly tightened under the light major student's foot. It suddenly wrapped around the student's ankle and sent him flying. "Damn it!" Qilong shouted angrily. Just as he was about to make a move to save the light major student, Han Shuo, who had retreated from his original spot, began to release bone spear attacks at him from another direction, forcing him to temporarily retreat. However, the other student quickly released a radiant sword slash and cut through the rope, causing the student to fall from the sky and cry out loudly in pain. A large rock that had been entangled by the rope suddenly rolled down from the fake mountain on the left, crashing towards Qilong and the others. Qilong and the other two were shocked and simultaneously released magic to defend against the falling rock. Then, they hurriedly closed in on the direction of the trap. Light magic did have a miraculous restraining effect on dark creatures. However, from beginning to end, the dark creatures that Han Shuo had summoned hadn't faced them head-on. Instead, they'd used other items to attack the 3 light major students. This made it so that the restraining effect of the light major on the dark creatures couldn't be fully utilized. Finally, the 4 dark major students chasing from behind also caught up to this place. When they saw that the 3 from the light major were hurriedly dealing with the attacks of the traps, they immediately joined the fray excitedly. They arrived not far in front of them and started chanting dark magic, planning to add insult to injury and lend Han Shuo a helping hand. Suddenly, a magic incantation came out of Qilong's mouth, and a blinding light suddenly shot out from the dark sky. This light was so bright that everyone's eyes were temporarily blinded for a moment. Even the other 2 light major students, who were caught off guard, couldn't see their surroundings with their eyes open. Qilong, who had closed his eyes earlier, calculated the time for the strong light spell to run out and suddenly opened them, intending to give everyone who was temporarily blinded a devastating blow that could turn the tide of the battle. Unfortunately, when he opened his eyes and didn't even have time to chant the spell, he saw a dozen skeletal warriors and zombie warriors surround him. Pushed by the 2 zombies, his body retreated uncomfortably, and then he fell into the trap. The other light and dark major students who were temporarily blinded stood there anxiously. Then, dark creatures approached them one by one, lifted or pushed them, and threw all of them into the trap. Not a single one was spared. The strong light spell did indeed have a great stimulating effect on the eyes of ordinary people. Han Shuo had also been hit by it, but Han Shuo's body was different from ordinary people's, and his eyes recovered extremely quickly. The strong light spell, which would normally take 10 seconds to recover, had only blinded Han Shuo for 2 seconds. Then, before the strong light spell's power had completely faded and Qilong hadn't even opened his eyes, Han Shuo had already recovered. He commanded the dark creatures and forcefully turned the tides of the battle that could have had a great change, and decided the outcome of the match in one fell swoop. It wasn't just the light major students. Even the 4 from the dark major were all taken care of by Han Shuo and sent into the trap. The trap had been dug very deep and contained a few minor mages who didn't know the levitation spell. There were also dark creatures lifting large rocks above them, ready to roll down at any moment. This was the end of the match. Deo, who'd just seen Han Shuo's abnormally eye-catching performance, had originally warmed up and become excited. But when he saw that Han Shuo hadn't even let the dark major students go and had thrown them into the trap, he snorted coldly and tensed up his face again. He said to Fanny beside him, "Your student has no team spirit at all. What good things have you done? I saw that your 4 students had no morale from start to finish and didn't have any use at all. Brian must have thought they were useless. That's why he gave them a reminder. It was just a joke. It's no big deal." Fanny was in high spirits as she laughed merrily, giving tit for tat to Deo. On the other side, the light major Archmage Voigtlander stood up with a gloomy and dejected face. He waved his sleeves and said a few words to Emma before leaving the plaza, leaving only Master Beecher to preside over the rest of the matters. Logically speaking, since the Necromancy Major was part of the Dark Major and Han Shuo had replaced Philite in the match, it should have been the Dark Major's victory this time. It was a pity that Han Shuo's actions were obviously a slap to Deo's face. This didn't make Deo feel the slightest bit happy. When he saw Voigtlander leave, Deo casually gave instructions to the teacher behind him and also bid farewell to Dean Emma, leaving with a dejected face. The Necromancy Major students exploded into enthusiastic cheers. This moment was the most exalted moment for the Necromancy Major in many years. The Necromancy Major had always been suppressed and ridiculed, but because of Han Shuo's sudden appearance, not only had he redeemed Fanny's face, but he had also won glory for all the Necromancy students. When the magical boundary opened and Han Shuo walked out, he immediately saw the fiery joy in Fanny's eyes and heard the cheers of the other necromancy major students. Although the situation is a bit odd, I still have to announce that the Dark Major is the winner of this time's match. The 5 students who participated in the match will receive 5 space rings that I personally refined. In addition, each of you will receive a magic staff. I hope that you will continue to work hard. When Han Shuo walked out, Emma's voice sounded leisurely and spread throughout the plaza. Amidst the envious gazes of the crowd, Han Shuo was the first to walk to Emma's side and receive the prize for this time's match from her hands. On the other side, the Dark Major and the others had climbed out of the trap with great difficulty with the help of others. Just as they were about to settle the score with Han Shuo, a smile once again appeared on their faces when they heard Emma's announcement, and they eagerly walked towards Emma. When he received the space ring, Han Shuo inspected it with his mental strength and was very satisfied. This space ring had been personally refined by Space Grand Magus Emma, and its capacity was at least 5 times larger than the one that Han Shuo was currently wearing. The materials needed for such a large capacity space ring should be even rarer. It looked like only a Space Grand Magus would be able to refine it. Up until now, Han Shuo had never used a magic staff. When he received this magic staff and infused it with his mental strength, Han Shuo suddenly discovered that there was another small space within the magic staff that actually had the function of storing mental strength. After casually casting a spell, he discovered that after the magic circulated to the magic staff, the speed of the spell increased by a small margin. It looked like this magic staff had the function of storing a small amount of mental strength and increasing the speed of casting spells. It was no wonder that every mage was willing to risk their lives to obtain a suitable magic staff. A wondrous magic staff indeed had the function of increasing a mage's strength more or less. After receiving the space ring and magic staff, Han Shuo didn't linger in the plaza for too long. He smiled and nodded at Fanny from afar, then left by himself, leaving all the remaining matters for Fanny and the others to handle. Wait, Brian. Han Shuo's departure didn't escape the gazes of the many students in the plaza. However, the crowd only looked at him in amazement and whispered amongst themselves, but didn't make any moves. However, when Lisa saw Han Shuo leave, she called out loudly from afar and chased after Han Shuo. After leaving the plaza and arriving in the direction of the necromancy training field, Lisa's face was inexplicably excited. She stared at Han Shuo and kept asking, "You were too strong today. You took care of all of them by yourself, as clean and efficient as the floating clouds and flowing water. How did you do it?" Shrugging his shoulders, Han Shuo said nonchalantly, "It's not that I'm too strong, it's that they're too weak." During his trip to the Dark Forest, the people Han Shuo had met were all true adept mages or adept swordsmen. He'd even met the Swordmaster Trunks and Archmage Emily. The McGrady Guild's guards, including Duke and Eric, were all experts who'd experienced hundreds of battles and had astounding strength. Having fought with these people, Han Shuo had experienced all sorts of situations. Now that he was facing off against these students who hadn't even reached the adept mage level and had even less battle experience, he naturally had the upper hand. It would be strange if he didn't win. If Han Shuo had used the Little Skull, his own martial arts techniques, and the Demon's Lair edge, then he wouldn't even need to use any tricks or schemes. In that case, he wouldn't even need to use any tricks or schemes. He would be able to use brute force to completely destroy the 5 light major students, leaving them with no room to resist at all. When did you become so strong? Lisa looked at Han Shuo in high spirits and asked curiously. Grasping the magic staff in his hand, Han Shuo infused his mental strength and started practicing the bone prison spell that a journeyman necromancer should know. As he chanted the incantation, his mental strength poured into the magic staff and used the staff as a primer, attempting to activate the bone prison spell of necromancy magic. The bone prison spell was a spell used to imprison the enemy. Once it was deployed, it would form a prison made purely of white bones and forcefully bind the enemy, rendering them unable to move. Necromancy magic with enough mental strength could control every single bone in the bone prison. Not only could it trap someone, but it could also use the bones in the bone prison to rebind any part of the person's body, turning the white bones into soft but tough vines. It was quite miraculous. The first time he'd used the bone prison spell, dozens of white bones had appeared in the air, but they couldn't truly form a bone prison. As Han Shuo relaxed his mind, the white bones couldn't flexibly assemble into a bone prison and fell to the ground with a loud crash. My strength is about the same as yours, so I can't say that I'm that strong. If you practice diligently, I think your accomplishments will be even greater. Who knows, maybe you'll be able to represent our major in next year's competition. Han Shuo continued to practice the bone prison art as he responded carelessly to Lisa's words. Lisa made a wry face at Han Shuo when she heard Han Shuo's words and then sighed lightly. I'm too stupid. I've studied necromancy magic for so long, but I'm not as good as you who've studied it for a few months. No, there are so many necromancy major students. Your strength is already quite good. Hehe, I'm saying that if you work harder, you'll improve even faster. I think that the magic of our necromancy major isn't any worse than the other majors. It's just that there aren't many people practicing necromancy magic now, so there aren't many experts. Han Shuo spoke carelessly with Lisa as he practiced the bone prison spell over and over again. After a while, some other necromancy major students seemed to have recognized the power of necromancy magic for the first time because of Han Shuo's exploits today. They hadn't even eaten yet as they excitedly came to the training fields and started practicing magic over and over again. Han Shuo actually stopped his magic practice when the other students appeared, avoiding the enthusiastic words of the students and walking out of the training fields. Han Shuo looked left and right when he left the training fields and walked towards Fanny's lab when he saw that there was no one around. When Han Shuo arrived at Fanny's lab, he discovered that the door was still locked. It looked like Fanny hadn't returned yet. Logically speaking, Fanny would usually be in the lab at this time. If she hadn't returned yet, it looked like she'd been delayed by the necromancy major's exploits today. Not in a hurry, Han Shuo sat down on the grass behind Fanny's lab and took out the necromancy magic books he'd obtained from the Cemetery of Death to study. The 3 original demons patrolled in 3 different directions and weren't afraid that someone would suddenly approach. They slowly studied the bone prison spell that they were about to master. After a while, the space in front of Han Shuo suddenly warped. A beam of light flashed and Dean Emma appeared in front of Han Shuo. Startled, Han Shuo immediately put the necromancy magic books back into his space ring. He then put on a smile and said to Dean Emma, "Hello, Dean. What are you doing here?" Dean Emma looked up and down kindly at Han Shuo, her furrowed face brimming with an appreciative smile. Chapter 129. What are you doing here? Her face brimming with a joyful smile, Fanny called out in pleasant surprise when she saw Han Shuo from afar. Leaving the grass behind the lab, Han Shuo strode towards Fanny and said, "I came to find you. I saw that you hadn't returned yet, so I waited for a while." Dean Emma's words just now made Han Shuo have no choice but to consider things carefully. From Dean Emma's words, Han Shuo understood that if he and Fanny really did get into some sort of relationship dispute within the academy, it might really affect each other somewhat. Han Shuo himself wasn't afraid of anything, but if it affected Fanny, that wasn't something Han Shuo wanted to see. "Come in first and we'll talk." Fanny was smiling a lot more than usual today because she was in a good mood. She gestured for Han Shuo to hurry in after opening the lab door. When Han Shuo arrived at the lab, Fanny's beautiful eyes stared at Han Shuo's face with a bit of a burning passion. She said, "I really should thank you this time. The teachers of the other majors are too much to treat our major like this. Hehe, you don't know how funny their faces were after you won. I've never been as happy as I am today in so long." "Then how are you going to thank me?" Han Shuo found a stool and sat down after entering. He then looked at Fanny with sparkling eyes and asked with a smile. Fanny's face flushed red. She seemed to think of something and seemed to be a bit afraid to look at Han Shuo. She turned her head and said lowly, "How do you want me to thank you?" "Give me a kiss." Han Shuo blurted out as if he hadn't thought it through at all. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, Han Shuo felt like he was in trouble. He laughed it off and said, I'm joking. Unexpectedly, Fanny didn't immediately get angry. She stood there with a red face and muttered to herself for a moment. She shyly walked towards Han Shuo and, before Han Shua could react, kissed Han Shua's left cheek with lightning speed. Perverted brat, you've gotten what you wanted now, haven't you? After kissing Han Shua, Fanny didn't dare look at Han Shua again. She abruptly turned around and pretended to clean up the mess in the lab as if nothing had happened. However, the deep red on the back of her neck and the trembling of her shoulders already exposed her excitement. Han Shua stood there in a daze and reached out to touch the cheek that Fanny had kissed. He felt the slightly damp fragrance on his cheek and couldn't help but use his finger to dab at the wet spot. He then stuck his finger into his lips and sucked. Seeing that Han Shua didn't say anything, Fanny finally couldn't help but turn around and look. She just happened to see Han Shua's somewhat ambiguous and lewd actions. She immediately stomped her foot in anger and shouted, "Damn it, you're really perverted." At this time, Han Shua had long since forgotten all about Emma's previous persuasion. He licked his lips in lust and said, "How am I perverted? You're just too charming. I actually wanted you to kiss my lips from the beginning, but you seem to have kissed the wrong place. That didn't count. Let's do it again." Han Shua closed his eyes after speaking and moved his lips forward. No matter how one looked at him, he looked like he was lustful. Fanny only felt a knot of anger when she saw Han Shua's appearance. Her slender right hand suddenly reached out and pinched Han Shua's cheek. She shouted delicately, "Bad brat, how dare you push your luck?" Han Shua immediately knew that he wouldn't be able to do as he wished when he heard Fanny's sweet cry and hurriedly opened his eyes. He was about to retreat when he suddenly saw Fanny's white, tender right hand reach out to pinch his cheek. His heart stirred and Han Shua didn't even think as he moved his mouth forward like lightning. He licked Fanny's beautiful palm and then retreated like lightning. With a soft "oh" sound, Fanny's body shook as if she'd been struck by lightning. She couldn't help but moan softly for a moment. She then reacted and said with a huff, "You bad brat, you're becoming more and more unbridled. You're dead for sure." An enraged Fanny flew straight for Han Shua as soon as she finished speaking, seeming to want to settle scores with Han Shua. Han Shua, who'd just taken liberties with Fanny, felt his heart sway and found it harder and harder to control himself. Han Shua in particular discovered that Fanny's attitude towards him was vastly different from usual, perhaps because she was too happy. Under normal circumstances, Fanny would have been furious and berated when Han Shua made such an excessive request to kiss her. Who would have thought that not only did she not berate him this time, but Fanny actually agreed to such an excessive request. Han Shua had just licked her palm, so her current bashfulness was clearly greater than her anger. Han Shua could clearly sense that Fanny was a bit different from usual at this moment. Han Shua didn't dodge when he saw Fanny rush towards him. He waited until she was about to reach Han Shua and reach out to teach Han Shua a lesson when Han Shua suddenly reached out like lightning and grabbed Fanny's outstretched hand, pulling Fanny directly into his embrace. A faint fragrance suddenly rushed into Han Shua's nose and mouth. As soon as the mesmerizing, dainty body entered Han Shua's embrace, her curvaceous body pressed tightly against Han Shua's body. This immediately made Han Shua, who wasn't a virgin, feel an intense disturbance in an instant. At this time, Emma's earlier persuasion, including the knot in his heart caused by his relationship with Emily, were all tossed to the highest heavens. His large hand wrapped around Fanny's waist, and he suddenly plunged his mouth towards Fanny's cherry lips, greedily and fiercely tasting. Fanny, whose body was bound by Han Shua, couldn't move at all. Even if she wanted to resist, she couldn't shake Han Shua. After a burst of sounds, her small hand suddenly pounded on Han Shua's body with all her might. However, as Han Shua greedily tasted and his large tongue stirred in her fragrant lips, an incomparably wonderful feeling slowly rippled in Fanny's heart. Slowly, the originally forceful pounding gradually became a bit weak. In the end, not only did Fanny's two hands stop struggling, she even unexpectedly wrapped around Han Shua's thick back and neck. She slightly raised her neck to respond to Han Shua's greedy invasion. Her almond-shaped eyes became misty, and the temperature of her body slowly rose. It was as if she had fallen into a sweet dream and was willing to sink into it. The incomparably wonderful feeling instantly spread throughout Han Shua's body. Such a wonderful person that he had yearned for day and night was being hugged and kissed by him. This kind of spiritual enjoyment was enough for Han Shua to moan out loud. Fanny's small tongue responded in the back, giving Han Shua even more pleasure like a flash flood. The originally simple kiss slowly became uncontrollable, and Han Shua's large hand involuntarily moved towards Fanny's fragrant buttocks. His erect lower body also gradually took the initiative to find a suitable angle. Suddenly, the sinking Fanny clearly felt the fiery hardness of an iron rod at her waist. She instantly understood the current situation and immediately began to struggle without a care for anything else. Because of Fanny's cooperation, Han Shua's body couldn't help but relax. He didn't expect that Fanny would suddenly have such an intense resistance and was immediately pushed away by Fanny. You. I. Fanny, who had pushed Han Shua away, stood there with a flushed face. She panted heavily, as if she wanted to say something, but because of her agitation, she couldn't say a complete sentence. Han Shua looked firmly at Fanny and said slowly in a deep voice, "Master Fanny, I think you should know that I like you." Han Shua's expression was serious and resolute, and his deep voice seemed to carry a strange attraction. Fanny's heart trembled, and she was obviously a bit flustered. She didn't dare meet Han Shua's gaze at this moment, averting her head and saying hastily, "Don't say any more. I don't want to talk about this topic for now. If you can advance to Adept Mage and graduate from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, I'll consider giving you a chance." With her back to Han Shua, Fanny was still panting unevenly, and her neck was completely red. Behind her, Han Shua looked at Fanny a few times, and then walked towards her with firm steps. He suddenly reached out and hugged Fanny from behind. Han Shua said softly, "You've been the goddess of my dreams since a long time ago. Your kindness and passion moved my heart, and your beauty made it even harder for me to extricate myself. I think my life has already been ruined by your hands." In the beginning, when Han Shua hugged Fanny, Fanny's body trembled and she wanted to struggle. However, when Han Shua's passionate confession left his mouth, Fanny's body suddenly went limp, and her entire person seemed to melt. She fell powerlessly onto Han Shua's chest, her cherry lips panting uncontrollably. "Really, I don't think I can escape your spell. I don't care about the reputation of the necromancy major, personal glory, or the bountiful prizes. I just don't want to see anyone insult you, so I fought without a care in the world. This is all for you. You should have known my feelings a long time ago." Han Shua changed the way he spoke the passionate words of love, speaking them with sincerity and numbness. This caused Fanny's body to become hotter and hotter, and the sound of her breathing became louder and louder due to her agitated emotions. After a while, Fanny suddenly said shyly in a low voice, I actually know. However, our current identities aren't too suitable, otherwise it would be disadvantageous to both of us. If you graduate from the necromancy major, then we can, you know." When these words were spoken, Fanny's inner thoughts were immediately exposed. Han Shua's heart was instantly drowned in ecstasy. He then tightened his arms around Fanny's soft waist that didn't have a trace of excess fat. He moved his mouth to Fanny's sparkling ear, and after lightly biting it, he exhaled a breath of hot air into it. He said mischievously, "I don't know. Tell me what we can do." Han Shua held Fanny in his arms, and could clearly feel Fanny's body tremble violently from his nibbling on Fanny's fragrant ear. This kind of charming and gentle flirting had a different kind of flavor to it compared to the stimulating kiss just now. Han Shua was enjoying this feeling very much. "You bad little brat. What sins have I committed to have a student like you? All right. If you graduate from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, then I can be your girlfriend. Are you satisfied now?" Fanny turned around and rolled her eyes at Han Shua with a face full of shyness, speaking softly with a red face. His heart filled with ecstasy and pride. Han Shua only felt that this was the happiest moment of his life. He only stood there with a silly smile on his face and didn't move, not saying a single word. "Get out. I don't want to see you today. No matter what you have to say, hold it in right now. I want to be alone." When Han Shua didn't say anything, Fanny shyly pushed Han Shuo towards the door. Just when Han Shuo had been pushed to the door by Fanny, Han Shuo suddenly extended a hand with a grin and blocked the door that Fanny was about to close. He then said to Fanny, "Wait a moment." With Han Shuo's hand blocking the door, Fanny couldn't directly close it. She glared at Han Shuo with a red face and said with a huff, "What else do you want? Haven't you bullied me enough today?" No, no. Han Shuo defended himself and said with a smile, "I've agreed to everything you said. However, I received a space ring personally made by Dean Emma after winning today's match. This space ring has a much higher capacity and quality than the one I'm using now, so my current space ring is temporarily useless. I want to give my space ring to you to use." Han Shuo looked at Fanny with a smile and said gently, "I can't accept anything from you anymore. If I wear your space ring, then others will definitely misunderstand our relationship. That won't do." Fanny's face was red as she refused Han Shuo's gift. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment when he heard Fanny's words, and then reacted. Han Shuo had originally planned on giving Yuna's space ring to Fanny to use, but because he'd received Emma's space ring at the last minute, he'd only planned on giving his to Fanny. He hadn't thought that Fanny would have such misgivings. "Then, I'll give this space ring to you. I don't think anyone will be able to see any clues from this space ring." Han Shuo took out Yuna's space ring and handed it to Fanny. "I've already said that I can't accept it." Fanny still didn't agree. "If you don't accept it, then I won't leave. I'm giving it to you, so just take it." Regardless of whether Fanny agreed or not, Han Shuo shoved it into her hands and immediately left without waiting for her to say anything, disappearing without a trace in a few steps. Chapter 130. The Bone Prison spell was a spell that journeyman necromancers had to grasp. If this spell could be used skillfully, it could create conditions for dark creatures and allow them to easily defeat their enemies. For 3 days in a row, Han Shuo practiced the Bone Prison spell by himself in the cemetery behind the Academy of Magic and Force. His unyielding willpower and intelligence after developing his brain allowed Han Shuo's understanding of the essence of necromancy magic to become more and more clear. Originally, Han Shuo would need to ponder for a long time before he could understand the meaning of some difficult magical knowledge. But now, Han Shuo's mind had become incomparably clear. When Han Shuo calmed his heart and pondered over a lot of knowledge, he discovered that he could always understand the meaning in a short amount of time. In a short 3 days, the usage of the Bone Prison spell had gone from continuous failures in the beginning to being cast with some unfamiliarity. He also officially started practicing the Bone Shield spell at this time. Even Han Shuo himself felt that such a rapid rate of practice was miraculous enough. Clap, clap, clap. A few claps sounded from afar as the graceful Emily appeared from the cemetery with a faint smile, slowly walking towards Han Shuo. Stopping his magic practice, Han Shuo looked at the approaching Emily and said, "I've already met Candide. I hadn't thought that your status in the Dark Mantle would be so high. It looks like I'll have to be added to your mission." "Hee, my mission can't do without you communicating with the forest troll anyways. Although my status isn't as high as that old fox Candide's, he still needs to do me a favor for me to talk to him about such a small matter. After you join this mission, I'll give you the majority of the credit after the matter is completed. This way, your rank in the Dark Mantle might increase by another 2 stars. When Emily arrived in front of Han Shuo, she reached out and naturally wrapped her arms around Han Shuo's arm, smiling in a fawning manner. Han Shuo was about to praise Emily when he suddenly remembered Candide's words. He had an additional layer of misgivings regarding Emily's other identity. His expression was a bit ugly as he said, "After I met Candide this time, he told me a few things regarding your true identity. He told me to pay attention to my actions and avoid unnecessary trouble. It was also at that time that I found out that you were Lord Amy's sister. However, I'm still not too clear about your other identity. Can you tell me now?" Emily's expression changed slightly when she heard these words. She looked deeply at Han Shuo and sighed lowly, saying, "It looks like Candide thinks very highly of you and is deathly afraid that I'll lie to you. All right, since that's the case, there are some things that I don't need to hide from you. I've actually been married for quite a few years, but he left for battle right after we got married. He never returned and died on the battlefield, leaving me a widow until now. Han Shuo grew silent after hearing Emily's words. He finally asked after a while, "That person's status seems to be quite high, otherwise Candide wouldn't have warned me like this." Nodding, Emily said, "That's right, but he's already dead, so there's nothing more to say. Because I was in the Dark Mantle after his death, I had some missions on me. My conduct was a bit strange because of the missions, so my reputation in the upper echelons of the Empire wasn't too good." "What do you mean?" Han Shuo looked at Emily and asked faintly. Shaking her head self-deprecatingly, Emily said with a downcast expression, "Just like when you first saw me, you thought I was a dissolute person. Because of my status as a widow, it was inevitable that I would be infected by some rumors when I came into contact with others during Dark Mantle missions." Han Shuo had taken Emily's virginity so others could distrust Emily, but Han Shuo had no choice but to believe her. Now that he saw her current state, he couldn't help but reach out and pull Emily into his arms, saying softly, "I don't care what others say, but I destroyed your innocence. Of course I know you're not the kind of person they say you are. Don't worry, I won't be affected by those words." Shaking her head with some gratitude, Emily said sadly, "Candide's words have reminded me that I must recognize the truth. With your strength and progress, your future accomplishments will be immeasurable. But because of my special identity, it looks like I can only maintain this kind of underground relationship with you. Otherwise, it won't be beneficial for either of us." Han Shuo was very clear about the meaning behind Emily's words. Just like how Emma had reminded him to pay attention to his relationship with Fanny, social classes and some taboos were unavoidable in this world. If he challenged the rules, he would definitely suffer a heavy blow. Holding Emily in his arms and kissing her, Han Shuo said with a grim expression, "Don't worry, I won't let you always hide in the shadows. Sooner or later, we'll be able to interact openly. The reason why I can't brazenly show it now is because I haven't climbed high enough. If there comes a day when I can decide the life and death of others at will, I think everyone will shut up. Even if they open their mouths, it'll be to express their blessings to us." Emily's face was wild with joy when she heard these words. She turned around and hugged Han Shuo tightly, saying emotionally, "You can do it. I believe in you." After a bout of entanglement, Emily's entire body was flushed red. She opened her mouth and said to Han Shuo, "Hurry up and take care of the forest troll's business. The McGrady Guild has already started contacting the merchants who trade with the forest troll. They're currently heading towards the Dark Forest, planning on purchasing that batch of siege equipment. You must have the forest troll hand over that batch of items to them." Nodding his head to indicate that he understood, Han Shuo thought for a moment and said, "There's a thief that I have a good relationship with. He wants to do this mission with us. I wonder if we can add him." "No problem. I'm currently in charge of this mission anyways, and I already have quite a few subordinates. It doesn't matter if he's one more. If he's trustworthy, I can directly summon him when I go back. This way, if you're at the academy, I can directly contact you through him. After all, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to directly go to your academy with my identity." Emily was quite straightforward and immediately agreed to Han Shuo's suggestion. "All right, he's called Chester. He should be responsible for guarding the northern stronghold for the time being. If you have any instructions that you can't personally show up for, then have him do it. I'll make a trip back to the Dark Forest as soon as possible. Don't worry and go about your business." Han Shuo said to Emily, I'll contact you if there's anything. Don't worry, I'm confident in completing this mission very quickly." Emily left Han Shuo after saying these words. After Emily left, Han Shuo thought for a moment and then walked towards the Buzzed Merchant Guild. There were still 2 days until the appointed time with Phoebe, but seeing that the weather was growing colder and colder, Han Shuo was a bit worried that the dwarves wouldn't have enough rations and daily necessities. He planned on making a trip to the Cemetery of Death and preparing the dwarves' rations for the winter. Now that he had a space ring with a larger capacity, he only needed to make a trip back and forth to the forest troll in a few days, and he'd also need to prepare rations and daily necessities. The forest troll had many people, and the space ring likely wouldn't even be enough to load a trip back and forth with rations. Therefore, he'd better take care of the dwarves' needs first. Han Shuo didn't see Phoebe when he arrived at the buzzed merchant guild with great familiarity. It was Fabian who came out to receive Han Shuo. Han Shuo learned from Fabian that Phoebe had gone out today. With Han Shuo's current relationship with Fabian, he would be able to take care of the rations even without going through Phoebe. Because of Phoebe's power, Fabian's status had risen since he'd followed the right person. Fabian directly brought Han Shuo to the warehouse where the rations were stored. Fabian ordered the warehouse to be opened and all of the rations that Phoebe and Han Shuo had prepared were placed into the space ring in one go. Help me tell Miss Phoebe that I need more rations and have her prepare them for me. I'll calculate the price in one go when I come back in 2 days. Han Shuo smiled as he looked at Fabian. Heh, no problem. With our relationship, I can help you with such a small matter. You don't need to worry. Fabian looked at Han Shuo with a smile and promised him. It looks like Mr. Fabian's status in the buzzed merchant guild is rising higher and higher. Han Shuo was a bit surprised when he saw Fabian promise so easily and opened his mouth to speak. Not at all, not at all. It's all thanks to your good fortune. If it wasn't for your appearance, I don't think I would have climbed up so easily. Miss Phoebe seems to think so highly of me because I introduced you to her. I really have to thank you. Heh, I didn't think that my nephew, Jack, would also receive your grace. It looks like you're our benefactor. Fabian looked at Han Shuo and said sincerely, You're too courteous. Send my regards to Jack and tell him that I came by, but I was a bit busy today and couldn't specifically catch up with him. Han Shuo exchanged a few words with Fabian and left the buzzed merchant guild with a smile. Chapter 131. The dark forest was also covered in snow now. Han Shuo's feet crunched on the snow as he made his way to the village where the dwarves lived. The dwarves had been forced to leave their original village last time because of the forest troll's appearance. Although Han Shuo had faintly discerned the direction they'd left in through the original demons, Han Shuo couldn't be certain where the dwarves had gone after so much time had passed. The forest troll had left and hadn't appeared in a long time. Han Shuo didn't think that the dwarves would necessarily give up their original village, so he decided to go there first to investigate. When Han Shuo arrived at the passageway into the village and looked around, a smile blossomed involuntarily at the corners of his lips. Han Shuo was certain that the dwarves hadn't left from the various concealments and arrangements around the passageway. Han Shuo threw his head back and gave a long whistle, the snow on the trees rustling and falling off. His sensitive ears then clearly picked up the sound of approaching footsteps. Indeed, after a while, a few dwarven warriors wielding battle axes and iron hammers approached from afar with cautious looks on their faces. Don't worry, it's me who's coming. Han Shuo immediately yelled out before the dwarven warriors could get close to him. The dwarven warriors in the distance couldn't help but sigh in relief when they heard Han Shuo's voice. When they walked up to Han Shuo, one of the dwarves said, Because it's winter, many things are difficult to obtain. Although this village has been exposed, we have no way of building suitable houses in a short amount of time. Therefore, even though we know that there may be danger here, we don't want to freeze outside and have returned to the village. Winter has come. I've come this time to bring winter rations and some thick clothing for you. In addition, you can rest assured about the forest troll. They won't continue to harass you in the future. Han Shuo smiled faintly and comforted the dwarf. The dwarves immediately cheered when these words were spoken. Their expressions were inexplicably excited and filled with sincere joy and relief. That's great. Recently, we've already eaten most of the food you brought last time. Because you haven't appeared for a long time, the village chief thought that something had happened to you. However, we didn't know how to help you, so we could only worry about you. It's great that you're here. Let's quickly enter the village and tell everyone the good news. The dwarf who had answered before said happily. His short and strong legs quickly strode forward, heading towards the depths of the village. Hearing that Han Shuo had come, the dwarves who were hiding in their houses to keep warm in the cold weather all came out of their houses and greeted Han Shuo in a friendly manner. Oh, it's great that you're fine. Han Shuo, we were very worried about you. Han Shuo didn't wait for the dwarves to urge him to stay as he spoke a few careless words and hurriedly left the dwarven village. When Bennett said that the elves would wage war against the forest troll, Han Shuo couldn't sit still after hearing this news. If it was before, Han Shuo would have wanted nothing more than for the elves to raze the forest troll to the ground. But now, the forest troll was completely under his control and could even be said to be his personal power. In addition, he needed the forest troll to cooperate with him on his mission with Emily. It would be very inappropriate if the elves came out to cause trouble at this time. However, it would take several days to travel from here to the forest troll's stronghold and back. Han Shuo still had many things to take care of in the Empire, so he couldn't split himself for the time being. This gave Han Shuo a bit of a headache. After careful consideration, Han Shuo felt that things weren't urgent. He'd wait until he'd settled things with Phoebe, attended a banquet with her, and then brought things to the forest troll's stronghold. It would only take a day or two. If the elves wanted to make a move against the forest troll, they might not necessarily make it within these few days. Not to mention that although the elves were strong, the forest troll weren't to be trifled with. The fact that the elves hadn't gained any advantage against the forest troll in so many years already spoke volumes. The sky had already darkened, and Han Shuo took advantage of the silence to return to the cemetery of death. He wasn't in a hurry to leave immediately. Instead, he took out another divine brain fruit and endured the extreme torture in the cemetery of death. He digested the divine brain fruit just like last time, allowing the brain region in his brain to develop once again. When Han Shuo felt that his body had recovered, his facial features had become even more distinct. The speed at which his mental strength condensed and circulated had increased along with his magical yuan. Han Shuo could faintly feel that there were already signs of a breakthrough in the molded spirit realm. It looked like it wouldn't be long before he'd be able to enter the next realm of demonic magic. The next realm of demonic magic was the true demon realm. Once Han Shuo entered this realm, he would form the demon infant and become a demon in the truest sense of the word. The first 3 levels of solid body, channel opening, and molded spirit training were only the basics of demonic magic. Before the demon infant took form, one couldn't be considered a true demonic practitioner. Once Han Shuo could enter the true demon realm, he would be considered to have truly entered the next level. With the demon infant's assistance, the true demon realm would allow him to fly in the air, refine magic treasures with magical yuan, and reforge the demon's lair edge. He could also train in some other powerful demonic magic, and he could even refine demons, which were even more powerful than the original demons. In short, the true demon realm was a dividing line. As long as he reached this realm, there would be many ways for Han Shuo to increase his strength, and his strength would greatly improve. Therefore, when Han Shuo felt that he was on the verge of a breakthrough, the joy in his heart was indescribable. It was already the morning of the next day, and Han Shuo didn't continue to stay here. He left the cemetery of death and used the transportation matrix to return to the Empire, then headed directly for the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. The ambiguous conversation he'd had with Fanny last time had filled Han Shuo's heart with boundless anticipation. Although Fanny hadn't immediately agreed to his pursuit, Han Shuo had basically understood Fanny's intentions. He understood that as long as he worked hard to advance another level, reach the level of adept mage, and graduate from the academy, he would be able to capture the beautiful teacher's heart. Han Shuo still wasn't clear on some of the more specialized terms for some of the new magical questions, and had to ask Fanny in order to understand. Therefore, Han Shuo still needed Fanny's help at this stage. When he arrived at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force and walked in the direction of the necromancy major, he encountered a few students from other majors along the way. Han Shuo suddenly discovered that he'd become famous. The gazes of those people when they looked at him were filled with surprise and admiration. There were even some beautiful female students whose eyes shone with the light of admiration. This kind of attention greatly satisfied Han Shuo's vanity, and he was in a rather good mood along the way. When he saw the admiring gazes of the beautiful girls, Han Shuo even greeted them in a friendly manner and displayed a radiant smile, causing the female students to blush and run away with small, quick steps. However, when Han Shuo passed through the training fields, his good mood was immediately shattered. and the smile on his face was replaced by a gloomy expression. In front of one of the training fields of the necromancy major stood the Earthrider Clark, wearing a well-fitting shirt and holding a large bouquet of fresh flowers. He stood there with a smile and was looking inside. Passing through the open door, Han Shuo saw Fanny explaining some magical knowledge to the necromancy major students with a smile on her face. However, Fanny's expression wasn't affected by Clark at all, and she didn't look at Clark either. She almost ignored Clark's existence. Even so, Han Shuo still felt quite disgruntled when he saw Clark standing there and gazing at Fanny with deep emotion. When he strode towards the doors of the training fields, he suddenly burrowed in, tilted his body to the side, and purposefully exerted force with his shoulder, causing the bouquet of fresh flowers to twist and scatter the flowers to the ground. In his actions just now, Han Shuo had purposefully lightened his footsteps and only suddenly sped up when he reached Clark's side. Clark, who'd been staring at Fanny, hadn't been able to defend himself. It was already too late by the time he discovered it, and the bouquet of fresh flowers had become a bit of a joke. "Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that this is our necromancy major's training fields, and it was an accident that you blocked the door." Han Shuo immediately appeared a bit apologetic when he saw Clark glaring at him like he was breathing fire, and explained to Clark, Brian, why did you think of coming to the training fields today?" Fanny's beautiful eyes abruptly lit up when she saw Han Shuo walk over, and she walked towards Han Shuo with a radiant face, gesturing for Han Shuo to hurry inside. Han Shuo was satisfied with Fanny's performance, but Clark's presence still made Han Shuo unhappy. He purposefully put on an ugly expression as he looked at Fanny and then at the fresh flowers in Clark's hands. He said eccentrically, "Who is the noble knight Clark waiting for with these fresh flowers?" Fanny started and rolled her eyes at Han Shuo with a smile that wasn't in a good mood. She then walked over and said a bit coldly to Clark, "Mr. Clark, I think I've already made myself clear enough. I just want to peacefully teach here and hope that you won't continue to disturb me like this. In addition, I don't want to have any unnecessary disputes with you because of your noble status. I think you understand what I mean?" Fanny's words were for both Clark and Han Shuo to hear. She was obviously rejecting Clark's pursuit and was secretly expressing her attitude to Han Shuo, as well as telling Han Shuo not to think too much about it. Therefore, when these words came out of Fanny's mouth, Clark's face immediately became ugly and dejected, while Han Shuo was in a great mood and a smile once again hung on his face. Clark nodded with a gloomy expression and sighed softly. He then held the flowers that had been set to 0 and left the training field with a dejected expression. He did not say another word. "Are you satisfied now?" Fanny secretly reached out a hand and pinched Han Shuo, saying fiercely, "You dare not believe me. Oh, it hurts. I believe you. Han Shuo was inwardly pleased as he feigned a pained smile. Chapter 132. Master Fanny, Brian, what are you two doing? Lisa called out from behind, looking suspiciously at Han Shuo and Han Shuo. Nothing. Fanny glared at Han Shuo and pointed a finger in the direction of her lab to Han Shuo, turning to walk inside. When she reached out, the space ring that Han Shuo had given her was quite obvious. Han Shuo only took a glance at it and was overjoyed. He knew that Fanny had accepted the ring. She pointed in the direction of the lab, obviously indicating that he should go there and wait for her. Han Shuo hadn't planned on staying in the first place. He nodded at Fanny with a silly grin and left on his own, heading for Fanny's lab. After waiting for a while, Fanny returned to the lab after the training field class had ended. She opened the door, and when Han Shuo came in, Fanny's expression was the same as usual. She asked Han Shuo, "All right, what do you need?" Although Fanny's expression was the same as usual, the two understood that their relationship had undergone a subtle change. It wasn't quite possible for Fanny to maintain her dignity as a teacher in front of Han Shuo. Looking at Fanny with a cheeky grin, Han Shuo said with a naughty smile, "Don't be so serious." Glaring unhappily at Han Shuo, Fanny said, "I have to be more serious with you. Otherwise, if I give you a bit of sunshine, you'll be too dazzling and your hands and feet won't behave properly." This kind of ambiguous tone was like a teacher talking to a student. It was like flirting between lovers. Even though Fanny was glaring at Han Shuo still felt quite pleased. But joy was joy. Han Shuo's willpower had been continuously tempered, and he wasn't someone who didn't know what was important. Musing for a moment, Han Shuo began to ask Fanny about some of the difficulties he'd encountered recently. Fanny's expression grew solemn when she saw Han Shuo raise his questions. She resumed the attitude of a teacher and explained the knowledge in detail to Han Shuo. Seeing that Han Shuo was working so hard and could even use the journeyman spell, Bone Prison, Fanny was even happier than Han Shuo. After a long while, Fanny sighed, "With your aptitude, it looks like it won't be long before you advance to Adept Mage. Even some of the questions you're asking now have to be considered before I want to answer them. I can't blurt them out like before. It looks like I won't be able to teach you for much longer." A good student would give a teacher an incomparable sense of accomplishment, but because Han Shuo's progress was too great, it also gave Fanny pressure. After all, Fanny was only an Adept Mage, and according to the division of strength, she was only one level higher than Han Shuo. Han Shuo's speed of improvement was beyond Fanny's imagination. If this situation continued to develop, Fanny's usefulness to Han Shuo would become weaker and weaker. This kind of feeling filled Fanny's heart, making Fanny feel a bit uncomfortable, but also very helpless. Heh, no matter when, you'll always be Teacher Fanny, the one who took me into the school and taught me everything. Heh, even if our relationship changes one day, your status as my teacher will not change. Han Shuo's mind was quite sharp now. He could more or less guess what Fanny was thinking from the changes in her expression and immediately smiled at Fanny. Shaking her head and sighing slightly, Fanny's pretty eyebrows furrowed as she said with some annoyance, "In our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, Jean and I are the only teachers in the Necromancy Major. We're only Adept Mages. When you've learned all of our knowledge, your progress will surely be hindered without anyone to guide you. That's what I'm worried about. You're thinking too much. When that day truly comes, there may already be a better solution, and you won't need to worry so much for now." Han Shuo could clearly feel Fanny's concern. However, with the existence of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo believed that he would be able to enter the depths of the cemetery as his strength improved. Han Shuo could faintly feel that there would be a way to make his strength stronger in the depths of the Cemetery of Death. Fanny seemed to have thought things through after hearing Han Shuo's words. She smiled and nodded, saying, "Perhaps you're right. I've thought too far ahead. All right, it's getting late. If you have nothing else to do, go practice your magic. I'm going to eat dinner as well. How about we go together?" Han Shuo's heart swayed as he suggested naughtily, "Humph, in your dreams. I definitely won't compromise with you before you become an Adept Mage. Get out. Hurry up and get out. You won't do anything good if you stay here." Fanny smiled coquettishly as she walked over, waving a magic wand in her hand to chase Han Shuo away. Han Shuo wasn't in a hurry and cooperatively called out as he retreated to the door. When he was about to be chased out of the lab by Fanny, he suddenly gathered strength and hugged Fanny like lightning, giving her a kiss and running away laughing loudly amidst Fanny's bashfulness. "Bad brat, I won't forgive you sooner or later," Fanny said angrily and slammed the door to the lab shut with a bam in anger. It was at this moment that Han Shuo's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly heard a low panting sound. The three original demons suddenly flew out soundlessly and drifted towards the source of the sound. Earth Rider Clark was hiding behind a railing in the distance, looking at Han Shuo with a face full of hatred. Han Shuo was quite familiar with that kind of gaze. Fitch had looked at him like this before he'd taken his revenge. His heart growing cold, Han Shuo suddenly felt that the situation was a bit troublesome. Clark was an Earth Rider and he'd long since witnessed the extent of his strength. Although Han Shuo's strength was still advancing by leaps and bounds, Han Shuo understood his own limitations. An Earth Rider was absolutely not someone he could handle alone. It was indeed a bit troublesome to be hated by such a character. Inwardly thinking of a solution, Han Shuo slowly walked in the direction of the dormitory. Earth Rider Clark followed him closely and only left silently after Han Shuo had entered the dormitory. Through the observation of the original demons, Han Shuo could see the expression on Clark's face. He felt that Clark would definitely not let the matter rest. With Clark's strength as an Earth Rider and his methods in the Dark Forest, Han Shuo believed that if Clark wanted to deal with him, he wouldn't secretly set him up like a child like Fitch. It was likely that as soon as Clark made his move, it would be a thunderous, powerful attack. With his strength and confidence, he would make sure that Han Shuo would never be able to turn things around and leave no one alive. The two brothers, Clark and Claude, had extremely similar personalities. They were both the type of people who appeared bright and upright on the surface, but were filled with darkness in their hearts. Han Shuo had long since recognized this point, and so he couldn't help but be on his guard. When night fell, Han Shuo didn't linger in the dormitory. Instead, he hid in what used to be the warehouse and placed an original demon in the dormitory. He wanted to see if Clark would take the opportunity to give him a destructive blow. The warehouse was as messy as ever. All sorts of useless items had been shoved in and then cleaned up by Borg and BB early in the morning. The current Han Shuo was tall and strong, and a size larger than before. He felt a bit unaccustomed to staying in the warehouse, but he had to do so for safety's sake. When it was deep into the night, Han Shuo silently meditated and gathered his mental strength. After maintaining a clear mind, it was as if his entire being had become one with the night. His breathing and heartbeat were maintained at a shockingly gentle pace. If it wasn't for his body temperature, he'd be like a dead person without any signs of life. The speed of his meditation now was much faster than before. Although Han Shuo had been mentally prepared, he was still astonished to feel that the speed at which his mental strength gathered was much faster when he meditated. This made Han Shuo understand that his training in mental strength must have far surpassed that of ordinary mages. After an unknown amount of time, when the cold night was about to pass, Han Shuo was still thinking that he was making a mountain out of a molehill and that Clark wouldn't come over. That was when the original demon finally discovered Clark's figure. Unlike the Dark Mantle or other Nightwalkers, Clark didn't conceal himself at all. He was still dressed in daytime attire, but his appearance was a bit gloomy. He didn't arouse anyone's attention as he walked over from afar. When he reached the window of Han Shuo's room, Clark dashed forward and leapt. His body suddenly soared into the air and nimbly landed in Han Shuo's room. Although I don't have concrete evidence, my brother Claude's disappearance definitely has something to do with you. Don't blame me for being cruel, you're just too annoying. You'll also disappear after today, and Fanny won't be able to find any traces of you in the future. Clark murmured to himself as soon as he landed from the window. He flew like lightning to Han Shuo's window and stabbed down with his sword. Han Shuo's bed had been decorated with a few pillows from the cupboard beforehand, making it seem as if someone was really sleeping. Therefore, when Clark stabbed down with his sword, a soft pu sound rang out. When Clark felt that something was wrong and lifted the blankets to see that there were only a few pillows inside, his expression changed slightly. He only froze for a moment and then immediately restored everything to its original state. He retreated from inside like lightning, looking like he intended to return the way he came. At this moment, the original demons that had been placed in the surroundings suddenly sensed the approach of another person. This person was like a shadow in the dark night. His body was practically plastered to the wall of the school building as he watched Clark's movements from afar. Han Shuo had originally thought that this person was in cahoots with Clark, but when Clark walked out and this person followed him mysteriously, Han Shuo immediately understood that this person's target was Clark. Startled, Han Shuo hadn't thought that there would be so many messy matters at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Seeing that Clark and that person were making a beeline for the Knights Academy, Han Shuo was afraid that the original demons wouldn't be able to see everything clearly due to the distance. He immediately rushed out of the warehouse and maintained an extremely large distance from the two, observing their movements through the original demons. After the original demons had followed him to the Knights Academy, Han Shuo discovered that Clark had entered one of the rooms and was sitting there in silence. This room had once been where Clark and Duke had conversed, and it looked like this was where Clark currently resided. The shadow that had been following Clark had followed him all the way here. When it discovered that Clark had entered this room, it stood in the distance for a while and then snuck noiselessly towards the other side of the Knights Academy. An original demon remained in Clark's room, another paid attention to the movements around Han Shuo, and a third followed behind the shadow, wanting to probe the shadow's movements. The shadow stuck to a remote room in the Knights Academy after a while, lifted a few tiles from the roof, and directly leapt into the room. "You're back." Lawrence sat upright in the dark room with a cup of hot tea in his hands as he asked the shadow that had flown down from the roof faintly. Han Shuo was greatly startled. He hadn't expected that the shadow would ultimately return to Lawrence's room. As the son of the Empire's finance minister, Lawrence had even purchased black iron ore from him a while back. Han Shuo had even exchanged blows with Lawrence at that time and had a rather favorable impression of this person. He hadn't thought that Lawrence would actually send someone to follow Clark. Suddenly, Han Shuo recalled what Candide had said to him the first time he'd arrived at the Dark Mantle. Candide had said that Lawrence's identity wasn't ordinary and had reminded him that walking too close to Lawrence could bring about some enormous trouble. However, Candide had wanted to say something about Lawrence's deeper identity, but hadn't said much. When Han Shuo saw this scene this time, he immediately understood that Lawrence's identity wasn't as simple as being the son of a finance minister. Candide, one of the three heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, probably wouldn't be worthy of such a reminder from the son of a finance minister. Yes, Clark just left his room and arrived at the necromancy dormitory area. He flew into one of the rooms and seemed to want to kill a certain student. However, I saw him walk out with a dejected expression and didn't hear any sounds of fighting. He probably didn't find the person. The shadow-like figure responded. Lawrence suddenly became interested and looked at the shadow in the dark. "Oh, that's a bit strange. By the way, which dormitory did Clark enter? Tell me." When the shadow revealed the location of Han Shuo's dormitory, Lawrence started and then smiled mysteriously. "So it's to deal with Brian. Heh, interesting. It looks like I'll have to have a good chat with Brian." Chapter 133. He's just a necromancy major student. Is he worth your attention? The shadow in the darkness spoke with astonishment. He's not ordinary at all. There are many mysterious things about him. I don't know what secrets he's hiding, but this person is quite interesting. Lawrence said slowly with a slight smile on his face. Clark's goal in coming to the Knight Academy this time should be to deal with you. Last time, he and that Duke from the Callow Empire should have been planning to make a move against you. I don't know why, but their plans were halted midway and Duke suddenly left our country. This matter is very strange. The person continued to speak. Nodding, Lawrence was silent for a while before opening his mouth to say, "All right, you can leave for now. It won't be that easy for Clark to deal with me in the Knight Academy. Humph, looks like I'll have to make the first move and get rid of Clark." The figure didn't say anything after hearing these words and flew up to the roof, burrowing out from where he'd come down and leaving. Lawrence sat upright in the room, silently sipping his tea and thinking about something. At this time, the sky was beginning to brighten. After the figure left, he flew to the back mountain of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, walking in a direction even further away. Because the sky was bright, Han Shuo couldn't brazenly chase after him. Adding that he still had things to do today, he temporarily gave up on continuing to search for that person's tracks. Taking advantage of the fact that the students of the Knight Academy hadn't woken up yet, Han Shuo returned to the necromancy major early in the morning. Han Shuo spent the entire morning alone in the dorm, practicing necromancy magic as usual while silently pondering Lawrence's identity, including his relationship with Clark. When noon came, Han Shuo went to the cafeteria of the academy for the first time, causing a small commotion. Every major in the academy had its own independent cafeteria, and the dark major was no exception. The cafeteria was divided into two levels. The food on the lower level didn't cost money and could be enjoyed for free as long as one paid the tuition fee. Of course, free food naturally wouldn't be too good. The food on the upper level was cooked by various famous chefs and was of a much higher grade than the lower level. Of course, the food on this floor required extra gold coins to enjoy. Generally, it was targeted at the students of the academy who were well off. The current Han Shuo was no longer an impoverished errand boy. The gold coins stored in the crystal card in his spatial ring were enough for Han Shuo to enjoy life to his heart's content. Thus, Han Shuo did not stop at the first floor. He directly went to the second floor and swiped his crystal card to order several expensive and exquisite dishes. He occupied a table by himself and ate heartily. After the previous battle, Han Shuo had become a celebrity in the academy. Those eating in the Dark Major cafeteria were all students of the Dark Major. Although Han Shuo had brought glory to the Dark Major last time, not only had his actions not won him the respect of the Dark Major, he had instead brought shame to them. Therefore, Han Shuo's appearance on the second floor of the cafeteria attracted all sorts of gazes. Han Shuo paid no attention to all of this. As his strength and experience increased, these students of the academy no longer cared about him. These students of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force were slowly being looked down upon by Han Shuo. In Han Shuo's heart, these people were merely children who hadn't experienced the world. They were of no threat to him at all. So you're here. Lisa and Lawrence walked in from the door. Lisa exclaimed softly and walked with Lawrence towards Han Shuo with a smile. Lawrence smiled at Han Shuo from afar and then went to order his own food. Lisa arrived in front of Han Shuo and unceremoniously sat down across from Han Shuo. When she saw the hostile gazes around her, her charming face grew cold. She put her hands on her hips and scolded, "What are you looking at? What's there to see?" Although the little she-devil Lisa was in the weak necromancy major, her foul temper was well known throughout the Dark Major. When she shouted, the expressions of those who were hostile to Han Shuo turned ugly. They cursed under their breath and turned their heads away one after another. Ignore them. They're all jealous of you. After looking around and cursing, Lisa giggled and sat down, staring at Han Shuo as she spoke. Speechless, Han Shuo said, "Then let them continue to be jealous. I won't lose a single hair on my head even if they're jealous of me. However, if anyone dares to turn their jealousy into action, I can guarantee that they won't just lose a single hair." Han Shuo's voice had been gentle at first, but when Han Shuo saw that there were still people looking at him with hatred, he couldn't help but raise his voice with a cold expression, full of warning. Although Han Shuo hadn't killed anyone in the last match, the coldness and determination he displayed throughout the match had already told everyone that he wasn't a merciful person. The spectators at that time had even had the misconception that if it weren't for the school rules, Han Shuo might really have coldly killed those people. Therefore, when Han Shuo gave a stern warning at this time, the Dark Major students who hadn't averted their hostile gazes under Lisa's scolding slowly lowered their heads one by one. "Heh, looks like you're not very popular." Lawrence walked over from afar, carrying a plate of exquisite food. After handing a plate to Lisa, he smiled as he sat down in front of Han Shuo and spoke to Han Shuo. Shrugging, Han Shuo said indifferently, "The crux is that some people are too bored. They don't have the ability, but they're very jealous. If you treat them nicely, not only will they not feel grateful, but they'll also think that you're afraid of them." "That's right. I deeply understand your point of view." Lawrence chuckled in agreement and nodded. Amy and Athena, the two necromancy major girls, suddenly appeared at the door at this time. When Lisa saw the two of them sit in another seat, she hesitated for a moment and then said with a plate in hand, "You two chat. I'm going to find Amy and the others." After saying this, Lisa stood up and walked through the two aisles. She greeted Amy and Roland from afar, and then sat down with Amy and Roland. When Lisa left, only Han Shuo and Lawrence were left in this seat. Because of Lisa and Han Shuo's repeated warnings just now, there was a lot of empty space around Han Shuo's seat. Therefore, no one should be able to hear the conversation between Han Shuo and Lawrence. "I've heard that Clark likes Master Fanny, but because of your appearance, Clark failed dejectedly today. Is that true?" Lawrence had a smile on his face as he asked casually. At this time, Han Shuo's mind was racing with thoughts as he lifted his head to sweep a glance at Lawrence. He also said nonchalantly, "How could that be? Master Fanny rejected Clark because Master Fanny doesn't have a good impression of him. It has nothing to do with me, so don't speak nonsense." Lawrence's expression froze when he heard Han Shua's words. He then said merrily, Brian, "Oh, Brian, we can be considered friends. Don't tell me you want to lie to me. The matter of you and Master Fanny has been spreading like wildfire in your dark major. As the saying goes, there's no smoke without fire. I don't believe that there's nothing going on between the two of you. You can say whatever you want." Han Shua didn't comment and lowered his head to eat his food. He didn't seem to care about Lawrence's words at all. "I know a bit about Clark. He's not as righteous and kind as he appears on the surface. It looks like you've offended him. In addition, I've heard that he suspects you of killing his younger brother. It looks like you're in quite a bit of trouble." Lawrence continued to speak and used his eyes to silently observe Han Shua's expression. When he saw that Han Shua was unmoved, Lawrence muttered to himself and continued, "Brian, we're friends, right?" Nodding, Han Shua put down his teacup and looked at Lawrence with a smile, saying, "We can be considered to be. Good. Since that's the case, I dare say that Clark will definitely deal with you. I hope you believe me," Lawrence said seriously. "Of course, when I returned to the dorm today, I saw that the blanket on my bed had traces of being cut. It was a good thing that I wasn't resting in the dorm yesterday, otherwise you probably wouldn't have seen me today. I thought about it and felt that only Clark would do this to me." Lawrence's intentions were slowly becoming clear after beating around the bush for so long. Han Shua also wanted to know what Lawrence wanted to do, so he didn't beat around the bush and admitted to it. Lawrence's eyes lit up when he heard these words, and he opened his mouth in surprise. Han Shua stared blankly for a moment and then blossomed into a brilliant smile. He smiled and nodded, saying, "You're not simple indeed. So you've long since made preparations. You made me worry for nothing. Since you treat me as a friend, I can actually help you and deal with Clark together with you." At this point, this was the main point. The light of surprise flashed through Han Shua's eyes as he stared deeply at Lawrence. He lowered his head and said lowly, "You're saying that you'll work with me to kill Clark?" Startled, Lawrence seemed to jump in fright as he looked left and right, saying lowly, "Brian, why would you think this?" Looking straight at Lawrence like this, Han Shua paused for a moment. When Lawrence felt his hairs stand on end, he said lowly, "Lawrence, when you said that you wanted to deal with Clark just now, I could feel your killing intent. I'm certain that you also have these thoughts, right?" When these words were spoken, it was Lawrence's turn to be silent, as if he was meeting Han Shua for the first time. Lawrence looked at Han Shua with an odd expression and was silent for a long time before he nodded and sighed, "Brian, I give in to you. That's right, I want to kill him too. This isn't the place to talk. I still have some matters to attend to today. Come find me tomorrow afternoon. Perhaps we can discuss this properly." After Lawrence said that he also wanted to kill Clark, Han Shua suddenly stopped looking at Lawrence and lowered his head to continue eating as if nothing had happened. He said this in a low voice. Nodding in silence as well, Lawrence and Han Shua faced each other and ate with their heads down. They didn't say another word midway and didn't raise their heads to look at each other. After maintaining this strange situation for a long time, Han Shua stood up and walked calmly out of the cafeteria. When Han Shua was about to walk out of the cafeteria, Lawrence suddenly raised his head and stared deeply at Han Shua's back. He said in a voice that only he could hear, "What a scary guy." After leaving the cafeteria, Han Shua didn't want to think about what had happened and left directly from the back of the mountain. When no one was paying attention, he hired a carriage and made his way to the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Today was the day that Han Shua and Phoebe had agreed upon. The materials for refining the Earth Elite Zombie and the food for the Forest Troll still needed to be completed through Phoebe. In addition, Han Shua had also started preparing to refine the Een demons, a level higher than the original demons, after advancing to the true demon realm. Han Shua had also discovered a place of extreme wood in the sacred land of the Forest Troll. This meant that he could also refine the Wood Elite Zombie. Then he would have to trouble Phoebe with even more materials. After arriving at the Buzzed Merchant Guild, Han Shua learned from Fabian that Phoebe hadn't returned yet. Phoebe had instructed Fabian beforehand that if Han Shua came, he was to have Han Shua wait for a while. She would return to the guild in the evening. Seeing that it was still early, Han Shuo let Fabian lead the way and went to find Jack to catch up on old times. Jack was also very happy to hear that Han Shuo had come. He found a quiet place with Han Shuo and started chatting happily. Han Shuo knew from Jack's words that because of his instructions, Phoebe thought very highly of Jack and had him learn from the best teacher in the Buzz Merchant Guild, including some business knowledge. It looked like Phoebe was planning on nurturing Jack into a character like Fabian. Phoebe finally returned to the guild in the evening. When Phoebe saw Han Shuo, she opened her mouth and said, "I've been busy the entire afternoon and made a set of robes for you. Come with me to my room and change. Let me see if this set of robes fits you." Hearing Phoebe say that she had spent the entire afternoon customizing a set of robes for him, Han Shuo felt a bit strange in his heart. His heart surged as he followed Phoebe in a daze and walked into her room. Chapter 134. When he arrived at Phoebe's room, Phoebe stopped in front of a huge mirror and took out a stack of black formal attire with exquisite gilded lace. In addition, there was a complete set of boots and underwear. "Change out of your inner clothes first. I'll help you put on the outer suit in a moment." Handing the stack of clothes to Han Shuo, Phoebe left and waited outside the hall. It was a set of shirt, boots, and bow tie. Han Shuo took a few glances at it and felt a bit sad. After hesitating for a moment, Han Shuo still followed Phoebe's request and put it on. Looking at the mirror, he felt that it was enough and looked much more handsome. "Are you done?" Phoebe asked from outside. I'm done," Han Shuo answered. After hearing Han Shuo's answer, Phoebe walked in from outside and stared at Han Shuo with her bright eyes. She nodded and said, "It fits very well. You look very spirited in these clothes." "Oh, really? I feel good too," Han Shuo answered casually with a smile. "I'll help you put on the outer suit as well." Phoebe came to Han Shuo's side and very calmly picked up the suit in Han Shuo's hands. Without waiting for Han Shuo to speak, she began to help Han Shuo put on the clothes with a somewhat joyful expression. The two were so close that the faint fragrance of Phoebe's body rushed into Han Shuo's mouth and nose. In addition, Phoebe's movements were indescribably gentle. This made Han Shuo blush, and his heart beat faster. When Phoebe helped Han Shuo put on the suit neatly and tied the bow tie for Han Shuo, Phoebe took a small step back. Her beautiful eyes sparkled as she stared deeply at Han Shuo's body. "I didn't expect your figure to be so good. This suit looks so fitting on you." Phoebe looked at Han Shuo and exclaimed with some surprise, "So, did you help me with what you promised me?" After enduring for so long, Han Shuo finally couldn't help but ask what he cared about. Rolling her eyes at Han Shuo, Phoebe said unhappily, "Can we not talk about those things now? We can talk about it after this banquet is over, okay?" He hadn't thought that his casual question would provoke Phoebe's displeasure. Han Shuo thought to himself that women's thoughts were indeed impossible to guess. Now that Han Shuo had a favor to ask, he could only nod with a rueful smile. All right, don't put on such an unwilling face. I promise you that as long as you accompany me back from the banquet, I will make sure you leave the Buzzed Merchant Guild with satisfaction," Phoebe said involuntarily when she saw the rueful smile on Han Shuo's face. Phoebe then had Han Shuo wait for her for a while and turned to walk into her bedroom. There was a wave of rustling clothes and Phoebe appeared in front of Han Shuo after a while. She had changed into an elegant light blue dress with a bit of makeup on. She wore a simple yet elegant light blue dress that was quite tight from top to waist, revealing the perfect curves of her chest and slender waist. The skirt around her lower body was wrinkled like flowers, rippling like waves as she walked. Her beautiful face was even more beautiful due to the light makeup she'd put on. Han Shuo was truly stunned in that moment. "What's wrong? Why are you looking at me so stupidly?" Phoebe was a bit proud as she raised her head and asked Han Shuo proudly. "No, nothing." Han Shuo's lips were a bit dry as he swallowed and responded. Laughing softly, Phoebe lifted her head and walked outside, bringing with her a faint fragrance as she passed by Han Shuo. Phoebe finally opened her mouth when she reached the door. "Let's go. We're going to the banquet now." Following behind Phoebe, Han Shuo and Phoebe boarded a carriage that had been prepared earlier. Two journeyman swordsmen acted as coachmen, and the horses galloped off into the distance. Where are we going? Sitting in the carriage, Han Shuo saw that Phoebe wasn't saying anything and was only sitting there as if thinking about something. He couldn't help but open his mouth to ask. The Empire's finance minister is hosting a banquet and has invited some well-known merchants of the Empire. This is a good time for merchants to gather and discuss business. Phoebe looked at Han Shuo and explained. Startled, Han Shuo said, "Isn't that the banquet Lawrence's father is hosting?" How do you know that Lawrence is the son of the finance minister? Phoebe was a bit surprised and asked Han Shuo in confusion. Lawrence and I have a good relationship. We're both students at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. We've even done a few transactions before, so of course I know a few things about him. Han Shuo didn't tell Phoebe that Lisa had told him about Lawrence. He said this matter-of-factly, as if he had a close relationship with Lawrence. Phoebe didn't suspect anything and nodded. So that's how it is. I hadn't thought that you'd be so close to my senior disciple. This is a bit surprising. The two then discussed a few things about Lawrence, mostly with Han Shuo taking the opportunity to ask questions and Phoebe answering. Contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, Phoebe seemed to know too much about Lawrence. She only knew that he was the son of the finance minister of the Empire. Although they shared the same master, the two hadn't met much. According to Phoebe, Lawrence didn't seem to be focused on training his martial arts. He spent more time discussing other random matters with their master than martial arts. It was no wonder that Lawrence's martial arts weren't that outstanding. Phoebe wasn't too clear on more things about Lawrence. She only said that Lawrence's conduct was good and that he had a good relationship with his master. In addition, Lawrence was a bit resourceful and seemed to be hiding many secrets on his body. It was just that Phoebe didn't know. The two chatted along the way and arrived at their destination unknowingly. When Han Shuo alighted from the carriage, he discovered that this place wasn't too far from the Imperial Palace. After alighting from the carriage with Phoebe, the steward had already politely and humbly invited Han Shuo and Phoebe in at the front of a luxurious manor. They passed through a corridor and entered a courtyard surrounded by fake mountains and flowing water. They discovered that all kinds of soft chairs had been arranged in the surroundings, and many exquisite and delicious desserts and wine had been placed on the flat ground beside the fake mountain. A few people dressed in luxurious clothing were scattered about, smiling as they chatted with wine glasses in their hands. When Han Shuo and Phoebe walked in, the stunning Phoebe immediately drew the fiery gazes of the men present, as well as the jealous gazes of a few noble ladies. "Hi, Phoebe, I'm very happy that you've come to participate in this banquet." A plain-looking, middle-aged man with nothing out of the ordinary suddenly called out softly on the lawn beside the flowing water and walked over with a smile. "Uncle Evie, how would Phoebe dare not come when you invited me?" Phoebe tugged on Han Shuo's arm and walked towards the Empire's finance minister, Evie. Evie Edgard was Lawrence Edgard's father. Han Shuo stared at Evie a few times and couldn't help but feel that Evie's looks were so ordinary. How could he have given birth to such a handsome son, Lawrence? Han Shuo felt that it was inconceivable. Evie looked at Phoebe with a smile and asked in surprise when he saw Han Shuo on the side, "Is this handsome fellow your boyfriend?" "Yes, Uncle Evie. He's called Brian and is quite familiar with senior brother Lawrence." Phoebe nodded and responded with a smile. She purposefully moved closer to Han Shuo as she spoke and hooked her arm around Han Shuo's wrist with a very sweet look on her face. Although he knew that Phoebe was doing this to purposefully prove their relationship to Evie, Han Shuo still felt a bit odd to be held so intimately by Phoebe. "Oh, so that's how it is. Heh. Lawrence has also returned from the academy today and is changing into his formal attire. I think he'll come out in a bit. You two can have a good chat in a bit," Evie said with surprise, and then smiled faintly at Han Shuo and Phoebe. He said, "I'm a bit busy today and have to entertain other guests. Please excuse me for a moment." "Don't be so polite, Uncle Evie. Go attend to your own matters," Phoebe said courteously. Evie had just left when a middle-aged man with a protruding belly and a wide build walked towards Phoebe with a cup of fine wine in his hand. The man suddenly saw Han Shuo beside Phoebe before he'd even arrived in front of Phoebe. His face immediately darkened a bit, but he concealed it very well. We haven't seen each other for a few days, and Miss Phoebe is still so beautiful and moving. I wonder if you've considered the matter I mentioned to you last time? The man's fiery gaze was fixed on Phoebe's body when he arrived in front of Phoebe as he asked, "I'm sorry, Mr. Cameron, but our Buzzed Merchant Guild is unwilling to join your merchant alliance." Phoebe's face recovered its coldness as she flicked a glance at Cameron and said faintly. Cameron's expression changed as he stared deeply at Phoebe a few times, and then said, "The existence of our merchant guild is to deal with the merchants of the Brute Merchant Alliance. The McGrady Merchant Guild, as a member of the Brute Merchant Alliance, seems to be a great threat to your Buzzed Merchant Guild. I hope you'll carefully consider my proposal." Mr. Cameron, who are you talking to?" A familiar voice suddenly sounded from behind him as the voluptuous and well-dressed Emily suddenly walked out from behind Han Shuo. Emily's expression had been relaxed and carefree, but when she saw Han Shuo, her face immediately changed. When her gaze landed on Phoebe and Han Shuo's arm, her eyes flickered uncontrollably as a pair of strange gazes focused on Han Shuo and stopped moving. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.